13 looked at his cell phone and read its contents with a solemn expression on his face. He was holding his phone with his right hand, while his left was lightly patting the head of a little girl, whose head was resting on his lap from time to time. She was 13's 2-year-old little sister, and her name was Remy. Aside from their mother, Remy was very attached to her older brother, Zion, who made her feel safe and protected. Whenever she saw him, she would follow him like a little duckling following her mother duck. Their mother, Alessia, found this very endearing, so she allowed Remy to follow her brother around, indirectly making him her nanny. At first, 13 found this little creature quite amusing and thought that babysitting her would be a trivial task, but it turned out that he had underestimated how attached a toddler could be to someone. Remy was quite clingy and would often cry whenever her brother hid from her or ran away from her. Although she didn't disturb him whenever he trained or was doing something important, she would always be around him during the times when he was idle. "Ah, my daughter is sleeping," Gerald smiled as he walked toward his 2 children, who were seated on a bench facing the garden. "How cute." "Shut up, Pops." 13 glared at his father. "If Remy wakes up, I'll show Mom your porn stash." The corner of Gerald's lips twitched when he heard his son's words. He and his wife had already accepted that their son's personality had changed after the incident due to amnesia. However, whenever he talked to the boy, he often felt that he was talking to an equal instead of a child. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." The two stared at each other for nearly half a minute before Gerald sighed and raised his hands in surrender. "We need to talk," Gerald said in a solemn tone. "It's about your brother, Mikhail." A month had passed since 13 had imparted the God of War axe technique to his older brother, Mikhail. Since then, there had been an explosive growth in his fighting ability, surprising Gerald and Alessia. When Mikhail and Shasha sparred with each other, the one who always won was Mikhail. While people might think that this was understandable since Mikhail was stronger, the reality was that Shasha was actually a genius fencer. Before her older brother learned the technique that was imparted to him by 13, Shasha had always been the winner whenever the two of them sparred. But now, things had changed. Despite not being a genius and only having strong foundations, Mikhail managed to surpass Shasha in a short period of time. Despite training harder under their mother's tutelage, Shasha felt that, no matter how much she trained, she wouldn't be able to beat her older brother. Of course, she couldn't beat 13 either. But she and Mikhail had already accepted that, even if they worked together, they would be unable to beat their 5-year-old brother, who seemed to know what they were about to do before they could even do it. 13 could predict when they would strike, where they would strike, and the proper method to counterattack. In fact, 13 would spar with his siblings at least once every day, making sure that they built a solid foundation. Gerald and Alessia even felt that they could leave their second youngest child in charge of their children's training by himself. 13 replied. "I'll come after Remy wakes up. I'll let her sleep for half an hour longer." Hearing his reply, Gerald nodded. "You can find us in the training grounds." After saying what he needed to say, he walked away with a smile on his face. There was one thing that he liked about this son of his. Whenever he said something, he would do it. Since 13 already said that he would come to look for them after half an hour had passed, he would definitely do it without fail. Half an hour later, 13 arrived at the training ground, holding Remy's hand. "Go to Mama first, okay?" 13 patted his sister's head. "I'll play with you later." Remy smiled before she tottered towards their mother with her hands spread wide. "Mama!" "Remy!" Alessia lovingly picked up her daughter and peppered her cheeks with kisses, making the toddler giggle. 13 then approached his siblings and father before placing his hands on his waist. "So, what's the problem?" 13 asked. "Your sister wanted to learn a technique from you as well," Alessia replied as he walked towards them, carrying Remy in her arms. "Also, if the technique is good, I want to learn it as well." "Oh." 13 arched an eyebrow, but a faint smile could be seen on his face. He had originally wanted to teach Alessia a technique, but he held back for the time being. His plan was to let everyone see Mikhail's improvement, giving credibility to his teachings. Seeing that his scheme worked, he decided to proceed to the next phase of his plan. And that was to strengthen his entire family. After spending more than a month with his new family, he understood their situation more or less. As a disowned member of the prestigious Leventis family, their father and mother worked very hard to support their family. Well, it was mostly their father who went into Solterra to do missions, while Alessia looked after the kids. Despite being a member of a prestigious family, Gerald didn't get any support from them. The only proof that he once belonged to that family was his surname. "What about you, Pops?" 13 asked. "Want to learn an amazing technique that will surpass the Leventis sword art?" Gerald rubbed his chin. "I want to know if what you did to Mikhail was a fluke or not. If you manage to strengthen your sister and your mother, I will accept your proposal." "Heh. I think you are making a big misunderstanding here, Pops," 13 said with a smirk. "Since you rejected my offer, you will have to beg me to teach you a technique when you change your mind. This is a limited-time offer, so choose wisely." Gerald was a bit conflicted about making this choice. The Leventis sword art was a technique that was taught to him at a young age, and he had been using it since then. The technique had already been ingrained in his body like muscle memory, making him feel that if he decided to start all over again with a new technique, all the years he trained would be wasted. Seeing his hesitation, 13 no longer insisted and asked Shasha and his mother to follow him to his room, where he would inscribe the runic letters on their bodies. He knew for certain that it would only be a matter of time before his father finally gave in, and when that day happened, he would never be the same again. Gerald and Alessia didn't know how their son was able to impart martial techniques to them, and they would be lying if they said that they weren't curious how he was able to do that. Alessia planned on asking this question to Zion, but since he was busy at the moment, she decided to ask him later after she received an upgrade to her own martial technique. 13 had asked Alessia to wait outside the door of his room while he transferred a martial technique to his older sister, Shasha. He made sure to tell her that no matter what his mother heard or sensed, she must never barge inside the room because the consequences would be dire. The ritual to transfer techniques was a delicate process. If 13 was disturbed in the middle of it, he might suffer a backlash, causing him brain damage. This was something he had to avoid no matter what, so he asked his mother to guard the door for his own safety. Unlike Mikhail, Shasha remained motionless as she scribbled the runes on her body using a marker pen. She didn't talk or giggle like Mikhail did. It was not because she was cold, but because she was the serious type of girl. Also, she trusted that her little brother wouldn't do anything to harm her, so she simply did as she was told and sat cross-legged on the floor. When 13 was done, he carefully placed 20 Jin cores around her body, and placed 2 Majin cores in front of him, holding 1 Majin core with both hands. After giving Mikhail the War God's War Axe technique, he was already thinking of what martial skill to give her sister. However, after his mother, Alessia, decided to learn a technique of her own, he changed the martial technique that he was planning to give Shasha into something else. The reason? It was because of his mother. If Shasha were the only one to learn a martial technique, 13 would have picked the best one for solo fighters. But when Alessia was added to the picture, it opened up several possibilities. There were martial techniques that came in pairs, especially techniques that focused on certain weapons or certain battle styles. These paired techniques resulted in a resonance, which would strengthen their effects multiple times, greatly boosting the fighting abilities of their users. 13 believed that there would come a time when his family would fight side by side, so doing it like this would benefit them more. Soon, the Majin cores in his hand glowed with power, allowing him to activate the runes that were now placed on the back of his right hand. The Jin cores around Shasha turned into particles of light one by one, merging with the runes on her body. 13 pressed his index and middle finger on his forehead as he began the extraction of the martial technique that he had chosen for Shasha. The name of this technique was the Dance of the Moonlight. It was a fencing skill that made its users look like they were dancing due to its graceful and fluid fighting style. It also allowed its user to teleport in short distances, using the shadows in their surroundings, allowing them flexibility for fight and flight responses. But the true beauty and deadliness of this skill was magnified during the night. Just as the name suggested, it was a skill that showed its full potential on nights when the moon hung in the sky. Pangea only had 1 moon, while the world of Solterra had 2. This meant that this skill's strength would be further amplified because it was getting power from 2 moons, instead of 1. The martial skill that 13 planned to give his mother later on was called Dance of Solaris. As the name implied, this was a martial skill that worked wonders during the day or when the wielder of the technique was illuminated by a light source. If the Dance of the Moonlight and Dance of Solaris were to appear on the same battlefield, a resonance would happen. Regardless of the time of day, their users would reach the maximum boost they could receive from their martial technique. Also, their attacks would be imbued by the power of the elements of light and darkness, making them even deadlier. Both wielders would also gain access to the martial skills of each other, allowing the one who practiced Dance of Solaris to teleport through shadows, and the practitioner of Dance of the Moonlight to unleash the swords of light. After extracting the technique from his memories, 13 poked Shasha's head with his index finger, allowing her to absorb the skill directly. Similar to what happened to Mikhail, Shasha fell into a trance, closing her eyes to digest the information that was passed to her. One down, 13 thought as he panted for breath. He then walked toward his bed and laid down on it for a while, to take a short rest. An hour later, he opened his eyes and observed his sister, who was still sitting cross-legged on the floor. Not wanting to disturb her, 13 left the room and talked to his mother, who was waiting for them outside. I have already transferred the martial technique to Shasha, 13 said. But it will take her some time to digest it. Also, I feel too exhausted to do the ritual a second time today. I'll pass over your technique tomorrow, mother. Alessia nodded with a smile. I'm not in a hurry. So, did you give your sister a good technique? Of course, 13 replied. I gave her the best. Will you then give me the same technique tomorrow? No. But, I assure you that you will not be disappointed with what I have in mind, mother. 13 began to explain about the paired technique that he chose for mother and sister. The more Alessia heard about the skill, the more interested she became in acquiring it. The fencing technique she was currently practicing was only a silver-grade technique. While it wasn't the worst, it wasn't the best either. The basic martial techniques were divided into the ranks of bronze, silver, and gold. The advanced martial techniques were divided into the ranks of mythical, legendary, and divine. Ironically, the martial techniques of the 5 monarchs that stood at the peak of humanity were only of the mythical rank. On the other hand, the skills that 13 was teaching his family were of the divine rank. Techniques that could only be bought in the system shop for millions of system points. Simply put, he was cheating. And he didn't feel even a single ounce of guilt in doing it. Mythical rank martial techniques? Excuse me? Is that some kind of peasant joke that I'm too rich and powerful to understand? Zion, no matter what happens, you must never tell anyone about this, Alessia said in a solemn tone. If word comes out that you are able to impart powerful techniques like this, the monarch clans and the prestigious families will definitely do everything in their power to get their hands on you. 13 nodded. I know, mother. My knowledge is only for the members of our family. Don't worry, I also added some insurance, preventing others from extracting the knowledge from Mikhail and Shasha. Anyone who tries will suffer a fate worse than death. The 5-year-old smiled evilly, making Alessia smile evilly as well. The beautiful woman had no love for the monarch clans and the prestigious families. This was especially true for the Leventis family, who had disowned her husband for choosing to marry her instead of one of the ladies from the 10 prestigious families to strengthen the alliance between the two sides. 13 didn't really care about politics, but he was not in a position to ignore the current state of things. He planned to visit the Leventis family sooner or later because he wanted to know if they could be used or not. He still hadn't forgotten his grudge against the system god, as well as the current patriarch of the Ashford clan, Aaron Ashford. Since his old man was a bit harder to fight head-on, he decided to just shift his target to the person who killed one of his former hosts first. Compared to the system god, killing a monarch was much more doable. So until 13 got his revenge on the backstabbing mortal, he would leave his old man alone, while giving him the middle finger in his heart. 8 hours later, Shasha broke out of her trance. The first thing she did was ask Alessia to prepare her something good to eat before returning to her own room to rest. She initially wanted to test her gains, but her mind was too exhausted, as was expected of an 8-year-old girl. The next day, Before the sun could even rise from the east, Sha was already in the training grounds, practicing the basic footwork and stances of the technique 13 imparted to her, Dance of the Moonlight. Currently, the only things she could use were the stances and sword strikes. She couldn't summon the special abilities of the technique since her current vessel still didn't have the capacity to implement it. After successfully finishing her first wandering and gaining the power from the One, only then would she be able to teleport through the shadows, unleashing deadly attacks that could catch her opponents by surprise. 13 was very happy with his sister's single-minded pursuit to become stronger. Perhaps not wanting to lose to Sha, Mikhail also trained extra hard to master his own technique. He wasn't a genius like his sister, but when it came to persistence and maybe stubbornness, which he inherited from their father, he was far from losing out. Mikhail was willing to go above and beyond in order to become stronger. The children of this world are really different, 13 thought. Then again, this world isn't a normal one either. Tier 1 and Tier 2 dimensional gates would sometimes appear in their own city at any given time. Because of this, the children of Pangea understood how harsh the world they were currently in was. The powerless would be killed, so as a precaution, some of the families would even hire wanderers to train their children from a young age. They hoped that once their children turned 13 and took part in their first wandering, their chances of survival would be higher than most. There were even academies specially made for the purpose of training the next generation of wanderers. Gerald and Alessia didn't let their children enter these learning institutions because they believed that they would be able to teach them better. Also, some of these institutions were either backed by the central government, the 5 monarch clans, or the 10 prestigious families. Although they did teach many ways of survival, they also brainwashed the children into patronizing the families that founded the institution. The elites who graduated from these academies would then become the subordinates of these factions, making them part of their private armies. As a member of one of the 10 prestigious families, Gerald knew this all too well. He even had his own team of subordinates when he was still part of the Leventis family. Unfortunately, his group was disbanded after his father disowned him. Truth be told, 13 could somewhat sympathize with his current father. Like his father, he was disowned by the system god. Both of them were also the black sheep of their families. An hour later, it was Alessia's turn to learn the dance of Solaris. In order to ensure that there would be no mishaps, he asked Mikhail to stand by the door, which the latter accepted with a solemn expression on his face. Since Gerald wanted to keep his current sword art, 13 didn't insist on letting him learn a new one. He would just wait for his mother to beat his father up once the two of them sparred to make the latter understand what he was missing. "What are you doing, Zion?" Alessia blinked in confusion when her son started to scribble symbols on her body using a marker pen. "Don't talk. Don't move. Don't do anything," 13 stated. "Don't disrupt my concentration. The backlash might cause me to suffer brain injuries." After hearing his reply, Alessia no longer talked despite her curiosity. 13 sighed in his heart. Unlike his siblings, their mother was an adult, so of course she would find what he was doing silly. Also, he used psychology to ensure that his mother really wouldn't move or distract him during the ritual. She was already very sad when her son looked at her as if she was a complete stranger. Alessia wouldn't do anything that would make her experience the same thing twice in a row. An hour later, 13 told Mikhail that he could continue training because the ritual was over. The older boy happily went to the training grounds to spar with Sha in order to see how much she had improved after learning her martial technique. Alessia was in a trance, but there was no longer any danger of a backlash. Because of this, 13 simply locked his door and plopped down on his bed to sleep. He woke up 4 hours later, just in time for lunch. His mother was still in a trance, so he left her alone and placed a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, so no one would barge in without him. When he arrived in the dining room, his father and siblings had just begun to eat. "How is your mother?" Gerald asked after serving his son a plate of bacon and eggs. He didn't really know how to cook food, and the most he could do was fry things. Even so, it was still passable. "You'll know either tonight or tomorrow, Pops," 13 replied. "I'm sure that Mom will look for you for a spar once she has finished her enlightenment." "Really?" Gerald smirked. "I look forward to it." The 5-year-old smiled mischievously at his father. Gerald definitely had no idea about what he would be facing. If his mother truly understood the technique, she would challenge Gerald tomorrow at noon when the sun was at its peak, allowing her to unleash her full might. Unlike Shasha, his mother would be capable of using the dance of Solaris once she understood the basics. She was already a superhuman and blessed with the ability to use spells, skills, and other techniques due to her current level of strength. All she needed was time to build her foundations. 13 believed that once Alessia fully mastered the dance of Solaris, she would be able to defeat enemies who were a rank above her without a problem. That was how strong a divine martial technique was, and in the hands of an expert, its true prowess would shine like the blazing sun. The sound of weapons clashing against each other reverberated inside the training room. Alessia and Gerald were sparring against each other, and the two were evenly matched, at least for the time being. That all changed when the beautiful woman smirked and summoned several swords of light that circled around her, forcing her husband to distance himself. But that was a mistake. The swords of light shot toward him like missiles, forcing him to dodge, deflect, and block them. While he succumbed to this distraction, Alessia managed to close the gap between them, and she placed her sword against her husband's neck, ending the duel. "You cheated," Gerald said in a bitter tone. "I did," Alessia admitted. "But it surprised you, right?" Gerald nodded because this was indeed the case. He had been so used to his wife's fighting style that the moment she changed her approach, he found it hard to counter her moves. Neither of them unleashed their full powers, not wanting to potentially destroy the training grounds and possibly their house as well. But the power Alessia displayed was enough to convince her husband that she had gotten much stronger after 3 days of comprehending her new martial technique. "Just how is Zion able to do this?" Gerald asked as he wiped away his sweat using the hand towel that Shasha had given him. "I asked him this question as well. And do you know what kind of answer he gave me?" Alessia asked back. "I don't know, but I'm sure you'll tell me." "You're no fun." Alessia then glanced at her 5-year-old, who was currently playing a game of catch ball with her youngest daughter, Remy. Alessia didn't know that 13 was already starting his little sister's training at such a young age, allowing Remy to sharpen her senses and improve her reaction time. "Zion said that he had died momentarily in the hospital and met a god," Alessia replied. "He added that since he was too young, too handsome, and too awesome to die, the god decided to bestow him with knowledge for how to succeed in life. However, he was banned from spreading this knowledge outside of our family." "I know that this may sound strange, but I am very inclined to believe this story," Gerald replied. This was the only reasonable explanation he could accept as to why his son was able to act mature for his age, as well as know things that even they didn't know about. "Me too," Alessia admitted. "But he's alive and healthy. That's all that matters. He's still young, so although he lost his memories, he can still create new ones as he grows up." Gerald nodded. "Well, at least that explains why he had been able to give the 3 of you these martial techniques. By the way, did he mention the rank of these techniques?" "Mythical rank," Alessia replied in a heartbeat. "Ha! Very funny," Gerald chuckled. "So, what is its real rank?" "Mythical." "Are you serious?" Even the Leventus sword art was only at the peak of the gold grade, which meant that the skill that Alessia and his 2 children had learned was greater than the ones owned by the 10 prestigious families. What Alessia didn't know was that 13 had lied to her. The techniques he had given his family members were divine-ranked martial techniques. The only reason why he didn't tell them the truth was for 2 reasons. The first one was that he had a feeling that his mother and father wouldn't believe him if he were to say that they were now in possession of 3 divine-ranked martial techniques. The second reason was for his family's safety. Currently, the highest known grade for martial skills was of the mythical rank. If a technique that surpassed that rank suddenly appeared out of nowhere, it would cause the 5 monarch clans and the 10 prestigious families to target 13 and his family. In order to avoid that issue, he only said that it was of the mythical rank. His father and mother were both wanderers, so the 2 could simply say that they discovered an ancient ruin where they gained these skills as a reward after clearing it. Although this story was suspicious, there was no other explanation as to how someone like them was able to gain the martial techniques that they now possessed. Fortunately, 13's brother and sister were still young, so they were unable to unleash the full power of their newfound abilities, allowing them to avoid suspicions. If someone asked how they came into possession of such powerful martial arts, he could just chuck the blame to the One, making the omnipotent being the perfect scapegoat. I hope the One doesn't make things difficult for him in his first wandering, Gerald said, feeling uneasy that his 5-year-old was using the omnipotent being who stood above all wanderers as a shield to get away with his antics. So, are you planning to get a stronger martial technique? Alessia asked. I can't, Gerald replied in a heartbeat. The moment I stop using the Leventis sword style is the moment I truly break away from the family. Although I got disowned, I still kept my family name. Since that is the case, I am expected to carry on the family's fighting style. Alessia smiled. Zion had a feeling that you would say that, so he told me to tell you this. The beautiful woman cleared her throat and tried to imitate her 5-year-old's way of speaking. Pops, you don't have to change your fighting style, Alessia said while trying to use Zion's tone. What I'm going to give you is the upgraded version of the Leventis sword style. It works the same way as your fighting style, but many times better. In fact, the moment your family sees this fighting style, all of them will beg you to return to them so that you can teach them all this technique. The handsome man frowned before shifting his gaze to his son, who was still playing catch with his daughter Remy. I will be going to Solterra 2 weeks from now to do a mission, Gerald said. Will I have enough time to learn it? You will, Alessia assured him. After all, you are the genius of the Leventis family that your family failed to rein in, unlike your brothers and sisters. Gerald sighed after hearing his wife's words. He was indeed hailed as the genius of the family, which was one of the reasons why his mother insisted that he kept the Leventis name despite being disowned by his father. Fine, Gerald replied. You win. I plan to return home safely to all of you after all. Alessia's gaze softened as she moved close to her husband to kiss his right cheek. You do that, Alessia said softly. Our kids are still young. They still need their father. Gerald didn't know that this decision of his would end up saving his life, allowing him to return to his family after barely surviving an assassination attempt made by a mysterious organization that operated in one of the human kingdoms of Solterra. The Leventis sword art, also known as Heaven's Divide, was worthy of its rank as a peak gold grade martial technique. Even 13 was quite impressed by it after checking its information in his memory core. There was a reason why many believed that the Leventis family was the strongest among the 10 prestigious families. But even though it was good, in the end, it was just a peak gold grade martial technique. 13 had countless divine techniques at his disposal, allowing those who wield them to transcend to the peak of the martial arts. Since his father was the family's provider, he needed to make Gerald strong, allowing the latter to provide him with a secure and stable environment to grow up into. Using the Heaven's Divide as a base, 13 simulated which among the divine martial techniques was compatible with this sword art. After an entire day of careful elimination, the 5-year-old decided to combine it with a divine grade technique called Eternal Blade. The Heaven's Divide martial technique focused on hitting the enemies and dealing divine damage to them with each blow. They were like paladins and were very proficient in being great damage dealers. But there was one problem. Their footwork was mediocre. Simply put, they could only show their might if they could hit their opponents or get close enough to do so. To compensate for this problem, the Leventis family used a movement technique called Heaven's Walk. 13 couldn't help but wonder why the patriarch of the Leventis family was so focused on choosing skills that had the word heaven in it. What's so good about heaven? 13 snorted. My old man is up there, and he looked and smelled like a piece of tea. Suddenly, he heard a loud rumbling of thunder in the sky, making him snicker. Guess I pissed off the old man, 13 laughed internally. Oh, how good it is to roast him and he can't fight back. 13 knew that the gods couldn't freely interfere in the mortal realm because they were bound by divine laws. What his father, Deus Ex Machina, did was still tolerable since he didn't break any rules. He chose a child who was about to die and merged 13's core into the boy's body. Gods were allowed to do this, as long as they didn't do it often. This was also why some of them could summon heroes from other worlds to appear in their worlds and do things for them that they were unable to do, like killing demon lords with their own 2 hands. The Heaven's Walk could be considered a decent movement technique since it was compatible with Heaven's Divide. Even so, it didn't completely fix the problem. At most, it was only passable in 13's eyes. Of course, the Leventis Patriarch couldn't be blamed for this. Getting skills and skill books from Solterra wasn't an easy thing to do. Since beggars couldn't be choosers, he chose the movement technique that somewhat supported their family's sword art. 13's choice, Eternal Blade, was a divine grade technique that was very compatible with Heaven's Divide. Not only did it hit hard, but it also came with its own set of movement technique, allowing its user to move fast and hit fast at the same time. But there was a strict requirement for using this technique. The user must have a high tolerance for pain. Executing this technique would put a great burden on its user's body. Only those who had trained their physical might and endurance to the very limit were capable of using this technique. Fortunately, his father was a masochist, someone who had trained his body to the peak. In fact, all those who mastered Heaven's Divide were required to have a strong body. This technique required them to get close to their enemies, so they were bound to get hit before they could deal their blows to their targets. This was why 13 was confident that if the Patriarch of the Leventis family saw his father with the improved version of their sword art, the former would definitely not hesitate to bring the latter back to the family by hook or by crook. Kukuku. 13 chuckled as he merged the Heaven's Divide martial skill and the Eternal Blade martial skill, forming the Heaven's Blade martial skill. Although it was supposed to have disadvantages, all of those downsides were negated because of his father's strong physique. This would have been a profitable business if I hadn't been born in Pangea, 13 thought. I have too many restrictions placed on me. Unfortunately, due to the contract he had with the Laplace demon and the One, he was unable to create martial techniques for other people with the exception of his own family. In short, if he didn't want to be erased, it was impossible for him to start this martial skill selling business. 2 days later, Gerald came to find him due to Alessia's encouragement. Of course, 13 happily bestowed the martial technique to his father, making the latter look at his son in disbelief. How? Gerald asked. Just how did you manage to create a martial technique that fits our family's sword style perfectly? Pops, your son is a genius, 13 replied. Just come back safely and bring me cores and monster parts. Also, once you return, use some of your spoils to build a smithy in our house. I want to experiment with blacksmithing. Zion, you're just a 5-year-old, Gerald said in a solemn tone. You won't even have the strength to lift a smith's hammer. Of course, I know that, 13 looked at his father with confusion. Did you think I would be the one doing the hammering? If not you, then who? Who else? Of course, you're going to do the manual labor, Pops. Forcing a 5-year-old to perform child labor is against the law, you know. The corner of Gerald's lips twitched after hearing his son's reply. He couldn't believe that his own son was planning to use him as a laborer for his smithing experiments. 13 only looked at his father with a devilish smile on his face. He planned to work hard for his family, but they had to work hard for him as well. Only by working together as a team would they be able to safeguard their family's interests and keep their enemies in the dark. 13 still had 8 more years to spare before his first wandering, so until that fateful day, he would arm his family members to the teeth. This would allow them to safely complete their missions in Solterra, paving the way for his arrival. I'll be going now, Gerald said before kissing his wife. Take care of the kids and don't miss me too much. Be careful, Alessia kissed him back. Come back to us safely. I will. I promise. After saying goodbye to his wife, Gerald also hugged and kissed his children one by one. When he was about to kiss 13, the 5-year-old used Remy as a shield, making Gerald chuckle. He then picked up his youngest daughter and kissed her cheeks twice. Remy did the same, making Gerald miss her already. Don't worry, Pops, 13 said. I'll protect the family while you are away. Gerald shook his head helplessly before ruffling his son's hair, who gave him an annoyed look. I leave everyone to you, Zion, Gerald stated. Take care of them while I'm gone. Of course, Make sure to bring home as many Jinn and Majin cores as you can. Also, don't forget to bring home some monster parts. I'll put them to good use. Okay. Gerald nodded before placing his beloved daughter down. I'm off, everyone. Gerald entered the small gateway that he had commissioned to be installed inside their home so that he and Alessia could come and go as they pleased. The installation was very expensive, but the couple still decided to go through with it. If Gerald wanted to go to Solterra, he would have to use the gateway in the center of the city, which belonged to the central government. He would need to pay a fee to use the teleportation gate, and all resources he brought back home with him from Solterra would have to be inspected by them as well. Everyone who used the gate as a means of transport was required to pay 20% of their spoils, which was something Gerald and Alessia wanted to avoid. Only those working for the central government were exempt from this rule, which was also their way of recruiting wanderers into their ranks. The 5 monarch clans and the 10 prestigious families had similar arrangements. All of them had secured their own gateways, allowing them to travel to Solterra and vice versa. Of course, their affiliates and subordinates were exempt from the fees as well. Gerald's mother had pleaded with her husband to allow Gerald to have a small gateway that allowed a handful of people to enter. Her reasoning was simple. Although he was disowned, Gerald still had Leventis as his surname. They would become the laughingstock of the world if someone sharing their last name was asked to pay the entrance and exit fees to use the gateways that belonged to the central government and other families. In the end, the patriarch of the Leventis clan reluctantly agreed, but he made sure to make Gerald and Alessia shoulder the expenses of building the gateway, not giving them any discounts at all. Of course, there were other ways of going to Solterra without the need to enter these gateways. But doing so was a gamble. As wanderers, they had the ability to move between worlds and appear in Solterra and Pangea. But the locations where they would appear were completely random. If Gerald were to appear in some other place in Solterra that he wasn't familiar with, he would have to survive on his own until he could find a gateway that would bring him back home. Likewise, if he returned to Pangea without using a gateway, there was a chance that he would unluckily spawn in the lands that had already been conquered by the Jinns. If that happened, he was as good as F***ked. In short, the gateways were a means to travel and to arrive at a fixed location safely. Truth be told, the first-generation gateways that appeared on Pangea were the ones that the people used in the past. However, as people became stronger, their greed became stronger as well. The central government seized these gateways and monopolized the access to them. It could also be said that all the gateways owned by the central government, the monarch clans, and the 10 prestigious families were the first-generation gateways that appeared in the world, including the gateway that was located in the center of the city where 13 and his family lived. It was capitalism at its finest. In short, in order to avoid harassment and gain easy access to these gateways, one would need to join the central government or become the subordinate of either the 5 monarch clans or the 10 prestigious families. If someone didn't want to join, that was fine too. But they needed to pay the price for using their gateways. The Leventis family watched as Gerald turned into particles of light after entering the gateway. A minute after his father had gone to Solterra, 13 returned to his room to plan his next course of action. According to Pops, he will be away for a month or 2, 13 thought. For the time being, I should decide what kind of martial techniques I will be using. Unlike the custom martial techniques that 13 had given his family, he planned to use several divine-grade techniques for himself. Due to the restrictions placed on him, he wouldn't be able to unleash their full powers. The reason? It was because he could only reach the rookie rank. Those who managed to survive their first wandering would unlock the potential within their bodies, allowing them to use skills that they could gain from Solterra. This first stage was called the rookie rank. And this was the only rank that 13 could attain, regardless of how many beast cores he consumed to reach the next rank. The rank ban ensured that he would not get past the rookie rank unless he was able to find a way to destroy its effect completely. 13 had no solution for this problem in the short term, so in order to compensate for his shortcomings, he decided to become a jack of all trades. He planned to master all the weapons in the world and use all the divine-grade techniques in his arsenal. The only magic that the 1 and Laplace demon approved for him to use was rune magic. He could use this unique ability up to its intermediate rank, which wasn't so bad. There was simply one big downside to using rune magic, which was that it consumed a lot of resources. Lots and lots of resources. Since my body is still young and I can't carry heavy weapons, I'll master throwing and shooting techniques first, 13 thought. For throwing knives, throwing stones, slingshots, javelins, crossbows, and bows, it's better if I first study the martial technique, cheap shot savant. 13 particularly liked this martial technique because one of his previous hosts was a cheap shot savant. The bastard would always attack his enemies from a distance, using the most optimum weapon in his arsenal. If the target was far away, he would use bows, crossbows, and slingshots. For mid-range, he would use javelins. For short range, he would use throwing knives, darts, and stones. Heck, there was even a time when his host picked up dwarves and threw them like cannonballs, allowing the close combat fighters on his side to get up close and personal with their targets. Of course, the only reason why his previous host had been able to accomplish such a feat was due to the fact that he was a 2-meter-tall barbarian who disliked fighting using swords and axes. It was a very shameless and dirty way of fighting, which was perfect for 13, who had no plans of fighting fair and square. For unarmed combat, I will choose Beast Heart Drunken Fist. 13 chuckled internally. I can't go wrong with that one. My first choice would be the Fist of the North Star, but the copyright god would punch me to death, so I can't use it. Among the unarmed combat techniques of the monk class, the Drunken Fist was still the most unpredictable and annoying martial technique in their arsenal. Paired with the power of bestial strength, those who'd make the mistake of assuming that 13 was an easy pick without any weapon would find themselves getting pummeled to oblivion before they even knew what hit them. As for close combat weapons, I prefer dual wielding with short swords and daggers rather than using a single sword, 13 smirked. The reason why he chose this fighting style? Because it was cooler. Dual wielding made someone look like an expert fighter, and 13 wanted to look cool and intimidating. Also, when he fought the system god with a sword, it didn't work. Since that was the case, he decided to choose a different style this time, so when they met again, things would end up differently. I can use the martial technique called Unlimited Blade Works. But this also belongs to the copyright god, so I'll get a strike if I use it. 13 grumbled. I guess I'll settle for Righteous Sentinel. The Righteous Sentinel martial technique was both an offensive and defensive martial technique. However, it shined the most when the one using it wore vambraces or gauntlets. The Righteous Sentinels had incorporated defense in this martial technique, using vambraces and gauntlets as shields. With this battle style, there was no need to carry shields on the battlefield, making it a very versatile battle style. Of course, the vambraces had to be specifically crafted to withstand blows, serving as a shield in times of emergency. Fortunately, with 13's blacksmithing knowledge and rune magic, he would be able to create these armaments, which he would be able to use during his third wandering. During the first wandering and the second wandering, the chosen ones would be unable to bring any weapons, armor, accessories, or artifacts to Solterra. The omnipotent being who ruled over this world didn't want anyone to gain a massive advantage from the get-go, especially those who were born from powerful and influential families. Those who managed to survive their first and second wanderings would gain the one's recognition, granting them the right to use stronger and more powerful equipment up to 2 ranks higher than their current ranks. This also applied to avatars, which could be passed down to them through trading. While this might not sound fair to those who didn't have a strong backing, it was nobody's fault. Life was never fair, and they could only blame themselves for not being born into rich and influential families. Fortunately, 13 didn't have this problem. Even though his father was kicked out of the Leventis family, he was still a very strong and capable wanderer. A wanderer that 13 could exploit to collect resources for him during his wanderings. As for my movement technique, I'll choose 2. 13 thought as he chose the movement techniques called Traceless Shadow and Steadfast Brawler. Traceless Shadow was a movement technique used by divine assassins because it didn't leave any traces, like sound and footprints, behind. Its users' steps would be as light as a feather, allowing them to move stealthily without being detected. Steadfast Brawler, on the other hand, was a movement technique created for brawling. It was fast and unpredictable, allowing the user to create attacks of opportunity when mastered to its peak. It complemented 13's fighting styles, allowing him to fight like a brawler using his beast heart-drunken fist and righteous sentinel dual-wielding battle art. With these two movement techniques, 13 had all of his bases covered. He could be as stealthy as an assassin going for the kill, or be as reckless as a brawler in one-on-one or group battles. Cheap shot savant, beast heart-drunken master, righteous sentinel, traceless shadow, and steadfast brawler, 13 muttered. These will be my core fighting styles, and all of them are divine-grade techniques. 13 believed that once he mastered these techniques, he would be fine until he reached the third stage of the human rankings, which was called the Apostle stage. Although he would stay at the rookie rank, the number of techniques he could use would make up for his shortcomings. Force had no place where there was a need for skill. Just like the Leventis family's sword art, heavens divide. No matter how strong they can hit, if they can't hit their target then it is meaningless, 13 said before closing his eyes. Those who say that, in the face of absolute strength, all tricks are meaningless are idiots. Strength alone can't win wars. Strategies also play a role in it. Although I can't have absolute strength in the short term, I am confident that I have absolute strategy and absolute tricks up my sleeves. As a system who had thousands of years of experience under his belt, 13 was certain that he would be able to outwit almost everyone, with the exception of Fate's chosen. The so-called heroes were protected by fate, preventing any harm from befalling upon them during their growth phase. But this rule was not absolute. 13 was confident that he would be able to deal with them. But it would require very meticulous planning on his part. Since he chose to defy fate, he would need to beat fate at her own game, using her own rules against her. In the past, he was nothing but a bystander who could only watch helplessly as his hosts were killed in front of him. Now that he was given the opportunity to step into the world and become one of its players, 13 would not rest until he got his revenge. Even if this revenge would take him his entire lifetime to fulfill. EI. Good, you're doing great, Remy. EI. Alessia didn't know whether she should laugh or cry as she watched her youngest daughter being taught a kicking move by 13. The 5-year-old called this technique the Nutcracker kick, and he was teaching such a move to the 2-year-old girl, whom he was supporting from behind. The young boy was holding her sister's arms as support, while the latter kicked with her right foot, raising it as high as possible. EI. Good girl. EI. Not being able to take it any longer, the beautiful woman approached the two kids with a smile. Zion, isn't it too early for Remy to train? Alessia asked. Not really, 13 replied. The earlier she masters this move, the more effective it will be when she grows up. Right, Remy? EI. Instead of answering, the little girl kicked one more time, making Alessia shake her head helplessly. Suddenly, a gentle breeze blew, making 13 and his mother frown. A moment later, a middle-aged man wearing a butler's suit appeared several meters away from them and bowed his head respectfully. I'm sorry for coming unannounced, Lady Alessia, the butler said apologetically. I wanted to come through the front door, but I didn't want to leave any trace of my arrival. I hope you don't mind. Alessia's face softened after seeing the butler who served the main branch of the Leventis family. Hans, it's been a while, Alessia replied with a smile. If you are looking for my husband, I'm afraid that he just left for Solterra. He will not return for a month or two. A sigh escaped Hans' lips after hearing the beautiful woman's words. Don't tell me that young Master Gerald is planning to run away this year again? Hans asked. I'm afraid that is indeed the case. Alessia sighed. He leaves around this time of the year. And here I thought I came early, but I'm still late it seems. Well, better luck next year, I guess? The butler of the Leventis family pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling incredibly disappointed. If only he had come a few days earlier, he might have been able to personally talk to his young master, who had been disowned by his employer. Is there something wrong, Hans? Alessia inquired. Usually, the moment he knew that Gerald was not at home, he would leave immediately after a few pleasantries. But the butler seemed to be conflicted, making Alessia wonder if something serious had happened back in the Leventis residence. Perhaps, being able to guess what she was thinking, Hans shook his head. It's not as grave as you think, Lady Alessia, Hans stated. It's just that Lady Callista's health hasn't been the best as of late. I was hoping to convince the young master to see her, even for a brief moment, during the patriarch's birthday celebration. Oh dear. Is my mother-in-law sick? Alessia asked. Even if she is, she won't say anything, Hans replied. You know how stubborn she can be at times. Always pretending to be strong. But after spending many years with her, I could tell whenever she was not feeling well. Although the poison in her body has been suppressed, it's still not cured completely. It's getting worse with every passing year, especially since the young master left. Alessia felt troubled because she and Gerald's mother got along very well. In fact, it was Lady Callista who had encouraged her to confess her feelings to her dense son who didn't care about anything aside from fighting. Hearing that her mother-in-law was still enduring the side effects of the poison, which she received from one of their dimensional raids when she accompanied her husband, made her heart ache. How about sending a representative instead? A calm voice reached both of their ears, making the two look at the 5-year-old boy who was walking toward his mother, holding his sister's hand. Since father can't go, how about I go on his behalf? 13 asked. I also want to meet grandmother. Hans looked at the little boy who had the same black hair as his father and the same green eyes as his mother. Young Master Zion, I don't think it's appropriate for you to go to the patriarch's birthday celebration, Hans replied in a respectful tone. I'm afraid that the people at the party won't look kindly at your presence. What are you talking about, Hans? 13 tilted his head in confusion. I'm not going to the party to see those people. I only want to see and talk to Grandma. Those people you talk about can drink their piss for all I care. Hans blinked before shifting his gaze to Alessia. Lady Alessia, is he really 5 years old? You know, I've been asking that question a lot since we came back from the hospital, Alessia replied with a bitter smile. He's changed a lot since the incident. Hans nodded. I can see that. In the past, young Master Zion was a timid soul. But now, it seems that his personality has been flipped. 13 didn't say anything and simply looked at Hans with great interest. Although he currently had no way to gauge a person's exact rank, he could instinctively tell that Hans was a very strong person. In fact, 13 believed that the butler was even stronger than his father and mother. The discovery surprised him at first. Since Pops and Mother are both grandmasters, that can only mean that he's a champion, 13 thought. A champion who is working as a butler. The Leventis family is truly one of the 10 prestigious families. I need to see if I can put my family connections to good use. Hans was paying close attention to the little boy because he could sense great intellect in the boy's eyes. These weren't the eyes of an ordinary 5-year-old, and only direct descendants of the 5 monarch clans and the 10 prestigious families had this kind of disposition at a young age. I don't think it's a good idea to bring this child to the family gathering, Hans thought. But he somewhat resembles his father, so Callista might feel better after seeing him. After pondering for a while, Hans agreed to bring 13 to the birthday celebration, which would commence in 2 weeks. As to whether he would regret his decision or not, he would find out on the fateful day when 13 appeared in the main residence of the Leventis family during their patriarch's birthday party. 2 weeks later, Zion, are you sure about this? Alessia asked as she worriedly fixed her son's clothes, making sure that he would look presentable in front of his grandfather and grandmother. I am. 13 nodded. Don't think too much, Mother. When you're there, please watch your manners. Don't talk rudely to people, okay? Okay. Be obedient and follow Hans' instructions, Alessia nagged. Please, don't be rude to people, okay? How rude, 13 arched an eyebrow. You mentioned being rude twice, Mother. I don't think I'm rude. Zion, you talk to adults as if they are your equals. That is being rude. You're right, Mother. I should talk to them like the insignificant insects that they are. Forget what I said earlier, Alessia said anxiously. Just be more polite, okay? 13 nodded. Don't worry, Mother. I'll be on my best behavior. Good. Alessia smiled as she looked at her son's reflection in the mirror. Although Zion was still young, his good looks were already apparent, which was expected of someone born between her and Gerald. He looked more like his father, with the exception of his green eyes that he inherited from his mother. After making sure that nothing was wrong with his clothes, Alessia kissed his right cheek before taking him to the living room, where Hans was waiting. "He looks almost exactly like Master Gerald when he was his age," Hans commented. "I'll have to be honest. Originally, I was skeptical about bringing him with me to the party to lighten up my lady's mood. But after seeing him now, I'm sure my lady will thank me for bringing him with me to the party. As to how the master will think, I'll worry about it later." "You have it hard, Hans," Alessia said with pity. "First and foremost, my loyalty is to Lady Callista," Hans replied firmly. "Even if I suffer a bit later, it will be worth it." 13 listened to the conversation and caught a few things of interest. First and foremost, although Hans was employed as a butler in the Leventis household, it seemed that he prioritized his mistress, Lady Callista, over his master, Arthur Leventis. "Maybe I can use this." 13 smiled internally as he followed behind the butler, who would take him to the Leventis residence. The continent of Aldebaran was jointly ruled by the central government, a monarch clan, and 3 prestigious families. The 4 other monarch clans, as well as the other prestigious families, had branches that were allowed to operate within the Aldebaran continent. This was the arrangement for all continents, which meant that the Leventis family had other branch families on the other continents as well. Hans brought his own car, which they would be riding to travel to their destination. At first, he wanted to bring a limousine, but there was no spare that was available for him to use because they were already reserved by the members of the main and branch families. "Young Master Zion, I'm sure that Lady Alessia has already told you this, but please, be on your best behavior the moment we arrive at the main residence," Hans said as he looked at the 5-year-old in his rearview mirror. "Understood, Hans," 13 replied. "You're such a worrywart. I mean, what can possibly go wrong? Young master, please don't jinx it." "Tisk." The butler shook his head helplessly as he shifted his attention back to the road. It wasn't just the Leventis family that would participate in this special event. Representatives of the 5 monarch clans and 9 other prestigious families would also be present in the celebration. While Hans was deep in thought about how Zion would be treated by the Leventis family, the little boy suddenly asked him a question. "Tell me, Hans, what are you willing to sacrifice in order to cure my grandma's illness?" "Young master, are you saying that you have a way to cure my lady's poison?" "That will depend on your answer, Hans." As someone who had followed his hosts in different world settings, 13 had a hunch that Hans liked his grandma. Liking was perhaps an understatement. He was pretty sure that Hans was in love with her. But he wasn't sure of it. Because of this, he decided to ask a question that would confirm whether his suspicions were correct or not. "Young master, my lady has been seen by many specialists, including experts from the 5 monarch clans and the 10 prestigious families. The only thing they could do for her was to suppress the spread of the poison in her body, allowing her to live a somewhat normal life. I doubt that a 5-year-old like young Master Zion has a means to see you." But before he could finish what he was going to say, 13 cut him off. "Hans, do you really believe that *T? 13 asked. "Every poison has an antidote, and every sickness has a cure. Some of them are just not discovered yet. So, I ask you once again, if, and I say if I can cure Grandma's condition, what are you willing to do for me in return?" "You already said it." She had already been checked by numerous specialists, and the only thing they were able to do was suppress the poison in her body. "So, you have nothing to lose by telling me the price you are willing to pay so that her suffering can finally end." Hans pulled the car to the side and stared at the rearview mirror, showing the reflection of a 5-year-old boy who had a faint smile plastered on his face. "Young Master Zion, are you really 5 years old?" "You still haven't answered my questions, Hans. So, what are you willing to give in exchange for my grandma's cure?" Hans remained silent for half a minute before he gave his reply. "I would do anything you ask me to, is what I'd like to say," Hans replied. "But I have a feeling that I would come to regret that decision. So, how about a compromise? Cure my lady of her illness, and you can order me 3 times. As long as they are within my abilities, I will do them, even if I have to risk my life to follow those orders. However, I have one condition. These orders must not harm the Leventis family in any way whatsoever. The corner of 13's lips rose up in a smirk because he finally confirmed Han's true feelings for his grandma. Since that was the case, he would exploit his feelings for her and make him one of his first allies outside of his own family. Good, 13 replied. When we arrive at the Leventis residence, I want you to do something for me. The young boy told the butler what he needed to do in order to determine if he would be able to help his grandma or not. Once the 5-year-old was finished with his explanation, the butler nodded his head and agreed to his instructions. Young master, you were hospitalized after that incident, right? Hans asked. That's right, 13 replied. Are you still the young master whom I know? Hans asked in a teasing tone. If I didn't know better, I'd probably think that a devil had taken over his body. How rude, 13 replied. Although there are instances where devils do possess the bodies of people, they prefer to take the souls of people more. Then, that means that the current young master is more dangerous than a devil. Only to my enemies, Hans. As for those who I consider to be my people, I will be their strongest ally and most steadfast of supporters. Hans felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at the devilish smile on the 5-year-old's face. Although his rank was a champion, one who was considered a true powerhouse in the world, he still felt as if he was just a puppet on a string who was dancing on the palm of the little boy's hand. 13 was certain that he had a good grasp on identifying whether someone was worth befriending or not. He could have behaved like any 5-year-old would around Hans, but the latter was giving him a good vibe. For this reason, he didn't act any differently around him than how he acted with his family. He also needed someone from the Leventis family to keep him updated on any news that might affect his family, especially when it was related to the people who hated his father's guts and envied him for his talent. But for him to get Hans' loyalty, he needed to cure his grandma first. He didn't know if he would really be able to do something about it, but he wouldn't know until he saw it for himself. As long as he was able to identify it, he would be able to find a way. Also, curing his father's mother was also a good move. Not only would it allow the Leventis family to have a good impression of him, but it would also make his father feel relieved, knowing that his mother was on her way to recovery. In the beginning, 13 only planned to use his family as a stepping stone to reach his goal. In other words, he initially planned to use them as mere tools. But he changed this way of thinking when he realized that what he was doing was similar to what the heroes of the world were doing to the canon fodders and villains. If there was something that 13 hated with every fiber of his being, it was heroes. He didn't want to do anything that would associate himself with them or make him seem like them. There was even a time when he told himself that what he was doing to villains was normal. That there was no need to act righteous when dealing with villains who were evil. At least, that was what people normally thought. But there were times when 13 had become the system of villains. Villains weren't born. They were made villains by their circumstances. Even the most innocent of people would become ruthless if their entire family was killed right in front of their eyes. There were many circumstances that forced them to take that path, and 13 knew this all too well. Because of this, he couldn't use being a villain to justify using others as stepping stones to get his revenge against the person who killed his host, the system god, as well as fate. If he were going to beat them, he was going to do it his way. We're here, young Master Zion, Hans said as the car entered a gate reserved for the VIP guests of the family. I'll leave the rest to you, Hans, 13 replied. Understood, young master. 13 closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Today, he needed to act and play his role well. The Leventis family was a prestigious family that emphasized courage and strength. They looked down on those who showed signs of weakness, so 13 had to tread a careful line to set his plan in motion. After getting down from the car, Hans brought him to the west wing of the residence, which was surrounded by greenery. The air was fresh, making those who breathed it feel invigorated. This is a good place for someone who is suffering from an illness, 13 thought. At least the Leventis patriarch cares for his wife this much. After a few minutes of walking, they arrived at a beautiful villa that was as big as 13's home. Hans opened the door for 13, allowing him to enter first. The servants gave the 5-year-old boy a curious glance because this was the first time they were seeing him. But seeing that he was with Hans, None of them dared to talk to him and simply observed him from afar. "She's on the second floor," Hans said. "Please come with me, young Master Zion." 13 nodded and followed behind the butler. He was paying close attention to the interior design of the house. Comparing this villa to his home was like comparing a castle to a house built from mud. It just proved how wealthy the Leventis family was. "Please stay here for a bit," Hans said. "I'll inform my lady of your arrival." After saying those words, the butler knocked on the door twice. "My lady, it's me, Hans. I have returned. Come in." After receiving a reply, Hans entered the room and closed the door behind him, leaving 13 standing with his arms crossed over his chest. Her voice sounded exhausted, 13 thought. She was a champion like Hans at her peak. Did her rank degrade after being poisoned? 13 was analyzing all the information that he had gathered about his grandma, Callista Leventis. She was one of the 3 wives of Arthur Leventis, who was the current patriarch of the Leventis family. Lady Callista had given birth to 2 children. The eldest was a girl, and her name was Sandra. His father had a close relationship with her. His aunt married one of the promising talents of one of the prestigious families, reinforcing the alliance between the 2 families. Fortunately, this matchmaking was born out of love before family politics became involved. The 2 were very much in love with each other even before their families contacted each other in order to set a date for their marriage. Since then, his aunt had been living a happy life with her husband. At the moment, she was a mother of 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl. When almost everyone in the family opposed Gerald's intention to marry Alessia, only Sandra and their mother, Callista, supported him. This proved how close these 3 people were. So if possible, 13 also wanted to meet his aunt and try to see if he could rope her into becoming his ally as well. A minute later, the door opened, and Hans made a gesture for 13 to enter. The 5-year-old entered the room. The first thing he saw was an old lady, who seemed to be in her late 70s. She was looking at him with a surprised expression on her face. Lady Callista looked at the 5-year-old with a surprised look on her face. For a brief moment, she thought that she had gone back in time and that she was looking at her son, Gerald, whom she missed dearly. Because of this, she tried to stand up to go to his side, forgetting that her legs didn't have the strength to support her body. She nearly toppled over, but thanks to Hans and her personal maid's quick actions, she was caught in time. The 2 assisted her back in her wheelchair. "My lady, are you all right?" Hans asked in a worried tone. "Yes, Hans," Lady Callista replied, feeling very embarrassed by her actions. "It was a spur-of-the-moment move, and my emotions got the better of me. I apologize for troubling you." "You can trouble me as much as you want, my lady," Hans said. "But please be more careful." "Understood. You're such a worrywart, you know." Lady Callista shook her head helplessly before shifting her attention to the 5-year-old, who reminded her very much of her youngest son. Although 13 didn't look exactly like Gerald when he was his age, there were enough striking similarities between them that made Lady Callista think that she had gone back in time. "Come here, child," Lady Callista said with the sweetest voice that she could muster. "Come to Grandma." "Yes, Grandma," 13 replied and walked towards the old lady, who was sitting in the wheelchair. Earlier she looked quite exhausted, but now she looked extremely happy. Clearly, 13's presence put the old lady in a good mood, making Hans and the maid, Tricia, look at her with smiles on their faces. 13 stopped walking when he was only a foot away from his grandma, but the old lady motioned for him to come closer. She then wrapped her arms around his body, sighing in happiness as she embraced her grandchild, whom she was only seeing for the 2nd time in her life. The first time was soon after Zion had been born. Since then, she never had the opportunity to see him again, until today. 13, who had just been hugged by the old lady, felt a soothing warmth wash over his body. It was as if Zion's body was reacting to his grandma's touch, which its previous owner hadn't been able to experience. As someone who had been living his life as a system for thousands of years, his emotions weren't really on the empathetic side. The only thing he cared about was his hosts, not even giving a damn to their loved ones. 13 was broken in his own way. It wasn't because he wasn't empathetic enough, but because the concept of human emotions was alien to him. When he felt the unfairness of the world toward his hosts, the only things he felt were anger, frustration, and the need to do something for them. There were very rare occasions when he felt genuinely happy. However, this happiness always revolved around his host, and never to himself. Right now, as he was being hugged by Lady Callista, these unfamiliar emotions that he wasn't familiar with rose to the surface. He felt as if he was safe and protected, being held by the old lady whose health was failing her due to the poison in her body. Before 13 could even stop himself, he also wrapped his arms around the frail lady's body, holding her gently. It was at that moment that he decided that no matter what happened, he would cure his grandma. That way, Lady Callista could also hug his siblings like this and make them understand what a grandmother's love was like. "You hold me so gently, Zion," Lady Callista said as she lightly patted the young boy's head. "Am I that precious?" "Yes, Grandma," 13 replied. "You are very precious." "So you say, but you came here to celebrate your grandfather's birthday, right?" "I didn't come here for him, Grandma. I only came here for you." Lady Callista felt as if her heart was melting when she heard her grandson's soft and childish voice. It had been a while since she last felt this happy, and she even wondered if it was her birthday instead of her husband's. "You will come with me to the party, okay?" Lady Callista said as she reluctantly pulled back and cupped 13's face. "You'll be good at the party, won't you?" "I will be good because that's what Grandma wants," 13 replied, which made Callista give him a loving kiss on his forehead. "Hans, I can't take it," Lady Callista said as she held 13 close to her chest once more. "Can I keep him?" "I'm afraid it's not possible, my lady," Hans replied with a bitter smile on his face. "The young Master Gerald would probably storm in here to get young Master Zion back. That unfilial child should at least let my grandson stay here for a few days," Lady Callista complained sadly. "It has been so long since I felt this happy." 13 pulled back and held the old lady's smile before looking at her straight in the eye. "Don't worry, Grandma," 13 stated. "I'll ask Mother to let me visit you as often as I can. I'm sure she will agree if Mr. Hans were to personally pick me up on the days that I'm allowed to come see you. Hans, make sure to pick Zion up 3 times a week," Lady Callista said. "Do you understand?" "Weiss, my lady," Hans replied. At that moment, 13 glanced at Hans and made eye contact with him. Understanding his motive, Hans lightly cleared her throat and bowed respectfully to the old lady, who was holding the 5-year-old without the intention of letting go. "My lady, I have stumbled upon someone who might be able to cure you," Hans stated. "Of course, I know that you have already lost hope, but can you just cooperate with me? I just need a drop of your blood." "You still haven't given up?" Lady Callista sighed as she lightly patted 13's head. "All the most powerful specialists in the world have already checked my condition. There is no hope for me." Seeing that Lady Callista seemed to be uninterested, 13 went to work and lightly tugged at her clothes. "Grandma, is Mr. Hans trying to find ways to cure you?" 13 asked. "Well, he hasn't stopped looking for quack doctors to take a look at me," Lady Callista replied. "Grandma, I want you to be healthy, so I can visit you more," 13 stated. "Also, once you are feeling better, you can visit our house. My brother and sisters would love to see you. Especially my little sister, Remy. She's only 2 years old, but she's very cute and very obedient. Grandma will definitely love her." Hearing Zion's words, Lady Callista's heart softened a bit. Seeing those innocent and hopeful eyes, she was unable to say anything that might disappoint him, so she relented and allowed Hans to get a drop of her blood. The butler took out a small vial that contained a purple liquid in it. He then gently poked the tip of Lady Callista's fingertip, drawing blood. With a simple flick of her finger, Callista sent the drop of blood inside the purple vial, which Hans immediately sealed with its lid. The small wound on her finger healed almost instantly, making the old lady sigh. "Zion, I think we should go," Lady Callista said sweetly to her grandchild. "The party has probably started and soon my husband will make a speech. It will be best if we arrive early." "Okay, Grandma." 13 nodded like an obedient child. He then gave the vial that was still in the butler's hand a sidelong glance, paying close attention to the color of the liquid inside it. The purple liquid had turned completely black after Lady Callista's blood had merged with it. Knowing that his grandma was suffering from poison, 13 carefully created a substance that would be able to tell him what type of poison and how severe it was. The poison has spread throughout her entire body, and it's eating up her lifespan, 13 thought. This explains why she looks her age. Wanderers aged very slowly because their bodies were very strong. A 200-year-old man could easily look like a middle-aged man once they reached the rank above champion, which was called thrones. Lady Callista was only 70 years old, but she was already a champion. With the level of her rank, her looks should only be that of someone in her late 30s or early 40s. However, the poison had already spread throughout her entire body, so her strength had diminished, making her look like her age, which was that of a 70-year-old woman. Although it's difficult to cure, it's not yet to the point of no return, 13 thought as he held his grandma's hand, walking beside her wheelchair. Lady Callista's personal maid was pushing it from behind, but she purposefully slowed down the pace, making sure that the 5-year-old could keep up with his grandma, whose smile that came from her heart made her look at least 10 years younger. The birthday celebration of the patriarch of the Leventis family was a monumental event. Those who wished to form a connection with the Leventis family would do everything in their power to attend such an important gathering. Unfortunately, not everyone had the connections or influence to get an invitation. The 5 monarch clans, the important members of the central government, and the members of the other 9 prestigious families were the only guests who were guaranteed to receive of such an invitation. As for others, they could only rely on their social skills and ability, as well as connections, to get through the gates of the Leventis residence. This was why 13 decided to use this opportunity to have a better look at what kind of family his father was born into, as well as get a better understanding of the other powerful figures who ruled the world from the shadows. "Grandma, it's best that we make a lasting impression on everyone," 13 said in a serious tone. "This is why timing is important." The old lady looked at her grandson with an amused look on her face. "Timing?" Lady Callista asked with a smile. "So, what is the perfect timing for our entrance, Zion?" "Leave it to me, Grandma," 13 replied. "I'll make sure that everyone will remember our entrance in this party." The 5-year-old said this with such a serious expression on his face that Lady Callista wasn't able to stop herself from lightly pinching his cheek. However, since she didn't mind playing along with her grandson, she decided to listen to him for the time being. As one of the patriarch's wives, she didn't need any introductions to show how important she was in the Leventis family. However, she was also very curious about what her grandson was planning, so she looked forward to what he was going to do. Hans groaned internally because he had a feeling that 13 was up to no good. Lady Callista's personal maid, Tricia, shared Lady Callista's thoughts and was also very curious to know what the little boy was up to. Inside the main hall of the Leventis residence, a handsome middle-aged man sat on a throne, overlooking the hall where his guests were currently eating, drinking, and mingling with the members of the upper echelon of their society. He was the host and birthday celebrant of this celebration, and everyone was paying close attention to him. Arthur Leventis, the patriarch of the Leventis family, was considered to be the strongest among the thrones of humanity. Some people would even say that he was a pseudo-monarch because, even though he still hadn't stepped into that rank, he was the closest one to reaching the monarch rank. However, attaining such a rank wasn't easy. One would have to gain the recognition of not only the world but also the one in order to step into that rank. The fastest way to do that was to conquer a Tier 9 dimensional gate. However, everyone knew how hard it was to achieve such a feat. Out of hundreds of thrones who had tried to challenge Tier 9 gates, where one of 13's former hosts had died, no one else dared to try and do so a second time. Only 6 people had come out alive from that expedition. 5 of them were the current patriarchs of the 5 monarch clans. Most people thought that they were the only survivors, but in fact there was one more. The general who led the expedition had also survived thanks to his rebirth ability. He had died in battle, but when the boss was dealt the killing blow, his ability activated, allowing him to revive once again. He was the 6th monarch and was also the current head of the central government. The 5 monarchs dared not to challenge him because of how influential and powerful he was. Someone who had the ability of rebirth was an opponent that no one wanted to face. Even if they ganged up to kill him, he would just revive again and teleport to a random place. The vengeance of a near-immortal monarch was something that no one wanted to face, so the 5 monarchs made peace with him and came to a compromise. This was why the central government became the backbone of the human race, allowing a semblance of law and order to remain in a post-apocalyptic world, where monsters in human skin threatened the lives of the common folk. Of course, ruling the human race aside from the government were the 5 monarch families, as well as the 10 prestigious families. The general who survived the Tier 9 dimensional gate also understood that these families had a role to play. He might be strong, but he couldn't defend humanity alone, so he accepted the compromise of the monarchs. This was the best option to keep the stability of the world while fighting against the jinns and magents, the constant threat hanging over their heads. "It's almost time, Father," a man, who seemed to be in his early 30s, whispered in the patriarch's ear. Arthur nodded and lightly tapped the armrest of his throne, catching the attention of everyone in the room. "Thank you, everyone, for attending this celebration," Arthur said. "I do not care for such festivities, but my family does. I simply let them use my name to hold this yearly event so that I can see all of your annoying faces." Cheers and chuckles echoed within the hall as the representatives of the 5 monarch clans, the central government, and the prestigious families all raised their glasses to acknowledge the Leventis patriarch's words with amused expressions on their faces. They knew that he was a no-nonsense type of guy, but they also knew that this was one of those occasions when he would use his own type of humor to entertain his guests. "I don't like long speeches, so let me just say one thing," Arthur said. "You can all PL." At that exact moment, the door of the hall opened. Since no one was talking, those who had a higher rank and were able to notice this small change shifted their attention to the door. Naturally, Arthur, whose speech was disrupted midway, looked in the direction of the door with a frown. No one in the Leventis family would dare disturb his speech, so he wanted to see just who had the guts to do this. However, the moment his gaze landed on the old lady sitting in the wheelchair, the frown on his face eased up. He could get angry with anyone, even with the 5 monarchs, but he would never direct a look of displeasure toward his beloved wife, who was suffering because she shielded him from harm. However, when his gaze landed on the 5-year-old boy who was standing beside her, his hands, which were resting on the armrests of his throne, stiffened for a brief moment. Similar to what happened to Lady Callista, he thought that time had rewound itself when his eyes landed on the boy who looked very much like his son when he was of the same age. 13, who was being gazed upon by countless people, remained calm. But deep inside, he was chuckling wholeheartedly, for he had succeeded in stealing the show. The second phase of his plan was to leave a lasting first impression, not only to the members of the Leventis family but also to the important members of the upper echelons of society, who controlled the entire world in the palms of their hands. A beautiful lady with long black hair and blue eyes looked at the 5-year-old in surprise. She was Gerald's older sister, Sandra. Seeing her nephew, Zion, at the party was unexpected for her. Unlike her parents, Sandra had many opportunities to visit Gerald and his family. She was even there to congratulate Alessia on the day Remy was born. She loved her young brother, and despite the fact that he had been kicked out of the family, she would always be on his side to give him her unconditional support. Sandra gave her father a sidelong glance, watching his reaction. She knew that her brother and father had separated on bad terms, so she was worried that Arthur would order the guards of the family to kick the child out of the house. 13 had also thought of this possibility, which was one of the reasons why he decided to visit his grandma first. This way, he would have a strong backer that could contend with his grandpa's temper. Just as he expected, Arthur didn't say anything and simply stared at him from afar. Hans, who was standing behind Lady Callista, wanted to wipe the non-existent sweat from his forehead because of 13's antics. When the young man said that timing was important, he didn't expect that he would time their entrance to be while Arthur was making his speech. This little devil sure knows how to make an entrance, Hans thought in his heart. Lady Callista, on the other hand, only found this scene amusing. Perhaps because of her bias towards her grandson, she didn't think that 13 had done something wrong. Also, She still carried a grudge because her husband had kicked Gerald out of the house. In her eyes, this simple matter was simply a little payback for the hardship she had endured over the years. Perhaps, knowing this as well, Arthur sighed in his heart and told everyone to enjoy the party before standing up and approaching his wife, who was looking at him with a rare smile of mischief on her face. The patriarch of the Leventis family glanced at Hans' direction, making the latter bow his head in respect. Tricia did the same and kept this posture until Arthur told them to raise their heads. "Are you my son's brat?" Arthur asked in a calm tone. 13 ignored Arthur's question, making Hans, who still had his head bowed, start to sweat for real. "The patriarch has asked you a question," one of Arthur's sons, Michael, said. He usually acted as his father's right-hand man and handled the affairs of the Leventis family. A glance was enough to tell him that the boy was his nephew. After all, the little boy had a striking resemblance to the black sheep of their family. When asking for someone's name, usually the person who asks introduces themselves first. 13 replied with a confused look on his face. "Isn't that common etiquette?" A pin-drop silence descended upon the main hall of the Leventis residence. If someone were to reply in this manner to the patriarch as well as to his son, that person would usually be punished or, worse, executed on the spot. But since Lady Callista was present, such a thing didn't happen, forcing Michael to fix the glasses on his face and deal with the youngster, who seemed to not understand his place. "I am Michael Leventis, your uncle," Michael stated. "Now, what's your name?" "Zion Leventis," 13 replied. "Your nephew." Lady Callista couldn't stop herself from giggling after hearing her grandson's reply. She, however, gave Michael a look of apology, which the latter returned with a bitter smile on his face. Arthur didn't say anything else as he moved behind his wife's wheelchair and gave it a gentle push, leaving the 5-year-old behind. Lady Callista knew that this was her husband's way of saying that he had already agreed to let Zion stay for the party, but she must not coddle her grandson any longer and let him fend for himself from this moment onward. Lady Callista frowned, but she didn't say anything else. She knew that Arthur had already given her enough face by not lashing out at her grandson, so she decided to meet with the other members of their family, as well as the guests whom she was acquainted with. Also, Hans was there to keep an eye on Zion, so she felt more at ease. After being left behind by his grandma, the first thing that 13 did was walk towards one of the buffet tables in order to get some food. The gazes of people followed him, watching his every move. This was exactly what Zion wanted. With this, he had plenty of opportunities to see how the people would react to his presence. Just as he was about to reach the table, a beautiful lady with long black hair and blue eyes blocked his path. "Zion," Sandra said as she lovingly gave her nephew a hug. "I was surprised to see you here. How is your father?" "Father is doing well, Auntie," 13 replied. Although this was his first time meeting Sandra, he had seen her pictures in their family photos, so he was able to recognize her right away. "Is he?" Sandra smiled after hearing Zion's reply. "Well then, what do you want to eat? I'll help you get it." Since Zion could not reach far into the table, Sandra decided to help him get some food, as well as drag him to their family's table, where her husband, Gideon, was waiting for her. Gideon Lockwood, one of the promising talents of the Lockwood family, which was part of the 10 prestigious families. Sitting at the table with them was Gideon's oldest son, Logan, who had just turned 11 this year. The handsome boy had short brown hair and green eyes. He gave 13 a brief nod before returning to his meal. "Sandra, I didn't know that your nephew has nerves of steel," Gideon commented in a sarcastic tone. "He's either very brave or raised in a very safe environment." "Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers," Logan commented without raising his head. "The ignorant are fearless." Sandra gave her husband and son a disapproving look, but she didn't say anything to correct them. She knew that her nephew was lucky because her mother was there. If 13 had been alone when he said those words, he would have been immediately expelled from the house without another word. "Zion, next time, when someone asks you a question here, just answer, okay?" Sandra said with a smile. "Also, make sure to answer in a polite manner." "Yes, Aunt," 13 answered as he ate the food on his plate. The 5-year-old observed the Lockwood family, especially her aunt's son, Logan, who would soon start his first wandering. I don't sense anything special about this guy, 13 thought as he gave Logan a sidelong glance. He might just be villager A. Logan, who had no idea that he was just branded as an extra by 13, continued to eat without a care in the world. After that brief moment of being in the spotlight, the party resumed its usual liveliness. Somewhere in the corner of the hall, an 11-year-old boy with black hair and blue eyes looked at 13 with contempt. He then motioned for a boy who was a little older than him to come closer and whispered something in his ear. The older boy glanced at 13 before nodding his head. Since his young master had given an order, he would execute it without fail so that he could continue receiving the grace and backing of one of the young geniuses within the Leventis family. 13 ate and chatted with his aunt, but he didn't forget to pay close attention to his surroundings. This act caught the attention of Gideon, who was Sandra's husband. Although his father has been kicked out of the Leventis family, this boy isn't half bad, Gideon thought. His awareness of his surroundings fits that of someone born from a prestigious family. A few minutes later, 13 finished eating the food on his plate. He then made a gesture for his aunt to come closer so that he could whisper something to her. "Aunt, no matter what happens, don't interfere and remain seated," 13 whispered. Before she could even ask the boy what he meant, 13 had already left their table and was walking over to the buffet area to get a drink. At this exact moment, a boy who seemed to be 12 years old walked toward 13 with a determined look on his face. The adults who had been paying close attention to 13 from the beginning also noticed the older boy moving in his direction and smiled. All of them were thinking that they were about to see something very entertaining. Lady Callista, who was also paying close attention to her grandson, noticed the boy who was approaching Zion. She vaguely remembered the boy to be a subordinate of one of her husband's grandchildren. Although she mostly stayed inside her own villa, Hans made it a point to report to her everything that was happening within the Leventis family. Understanding what was going to happen next, Lady Callista planned to put a stop on it. However, before she could order Hans to interfere, her husband's words reached her ears. "Just watch for now," Arthur said in a volume that only Lady Callista was able to hear. "I want to see what the brat of that no-good son of mine is capable of." Arthur was still annoyed that his speech was stopped midway due to Zion's sudden arrival. He knew Lady Callista well and understood that his wife wouldn't do anything to make him lose face intentionally. Since that was the case, the only one he could blame was the 5-year-old, who must have delayed his wife from arriving at the party early. Of course, it never crossed Arthur's mind that 13 orchestrated everything. He simply thought that his wife arrived late because she had to pamper the spoiled brat of his no-good son, who was no longer allowed to step foot into the Leventis main residence. "You can stop me now, but be prepared for the consequences later," Lady Callista said in a chilling tone. "It seems that the people in this household have forgotten what my temper is like since I have not interfered with the family's business after getting sick." Arthur and Michael frowned after hearing Lady Callista's subtle threat. How could they possibly not know how short-tempered the old lady was? This was also why Arthur only disowned his son and didn't strip him of the Leventis family name. He knew that if he completely burned the bridges with his son, his wife would burn him alive despite the difference in their ranks. "He won't be killed," Arthur stated. "The kids will not go that far." "But they will humiliate him," Lady Callista replied. "And that will make him hate the family. If my grandson starts to hate me, I won't sit still, Arthur. Prepare yourself to have one of your grandsons crippled for life." Michael was about to go and prevent 13 from getting hurt by the older boy, but his father's hand rested on his shoulder, preventing him from going. "Don't interfere," Arthur replied in a firm tone. Torn between his father's orders and the possibility of Lady Callista killing one of his nephews, Michael sighed in his heart and remained in place. Since his father ordered him to not interfere, he had no choice but to follow his orders. "I just hope that Mother Callista doesn't go too far," Michael sighed in his heart. "Terence has a promising future ahead of him. But his temper when it comes to our family's reputation isn't the best. It seems that he is not too happy to see Zion here because he is Gerald's son." While the guests were looking forward to an entertaining scene, the members of the Leventis family were divided on the farce that was going to happen next. Many people didn't like Gerald, but there were also those who liked and supported him within the family. Because of this, they were wondering whether they should interfere. But seeing the patriarch's stance, they were forced to stay in place and watch helplessly as the scene unfolded in front of them. 13, who had just finished filling his glass with lemon juice, sneered inside his heart. He already noticed that a particular group of children had been staring at him from the beginning. The boy standing at the center of the group had short black hair and blue eyes. Clearly, the child belonged to the Leventis family. Seeing that he already had a group of subordinates with him at such a young age, 13 knew that this only meant one thing. That boy was someone that the Leventis family had recognized as a talented member of their family. 13 walked towards Sandra's table, and the brown-haired boy who was targeting him hurried his pace to intercept his target. When the boy was only a few meters away from 13, the 5-year-old suddenly sneezed, sending the contents of his glass flying in the direction of the boy who planned to do him harm. Due to how sudden it was, the boy was unable to dodge the juice that landed in his eyes, making him shout in pain. "I'm sorry," 13 gasped when he saw that he had accidentally hit someone with his fruit juice. "Let me help yo, wah." Due to some of the juices that spilled on the floor, 13 slipped, making him accidentally headbutt the boy's stomach, making the latter cry out in pain as his body bent over like a cooked shrimp. 13 then raised his head and accidentally hit the boy's jaw, making the latter stagger before falling on the ground, unconscious due to the 3-hit combo that short-circuited his brain. First, he lost his vision, and the stinging pain of the lemonade made him raise his hands to cover his eyes. The next second, he felt something hard hit his stomach, taking all the breath out of his lungs. Last but not least was the finishing blow that hit his jaw, rattling his brain and causing him to lose consciousness. Everything was timed perfectly, giving the pitiful boy no time to dodge or even defend himself due to how sudden and fast things had escalated. 13, who was responsible for knocking out the boy, painfully rubbed his head, acting hurt. However, a minute later, he returned to the buffet area to refill his glass with fruit juice, not even bothering to look at the unconscious boy, who was hurriedly taken by the servants of the family away to be treated. Some of them also expertly cleaned the floor, making it squeaky clean. Clearly, they were already used to cleaning up after the mess made by their young masters, who were all looking at 13 with frowns on their faces. A fluke? An accident? These were the thoughts swirling in everyone's heads as they looked at the 5-year-old, who had returned to refill his glass with fruit juice. Everyone was looking forward to an entertaining show, but what they saw wasn't what they wanted. It might be an accident, but the result was very disappointing, to say the least. Lady Callista sighed after seeing that her grandson was safe. Hans, on the other hand, was looking at the 5-year-old with a solemn expression on his face. Other people might have brushed it off as a coincidence, but not him. He had interacted with 13, so he understood how intelligent the boy was. "You handled that wonderfully, young Master Zion," Hans praised the boy in his heart. However, he rejoiced too soon. The 11-year-old boy, Terence, who had sent his subordinate to deal with 13, didn't like what happened. Because of this, he personally walked toward the buffet area, followed by his subordinates. When the butler saw this, he groaned internally and desperately hoped that the older boy wouldn't make a scene that would humiliate his mistress' grandson. The expressions of the guests brightened after seeing this development. For them, who were almost always risking their lives in Solterra to fight against Jinn and Majin, any form of entertainment, especially when it came in the form of family drama, was a very welcome distraction in their lives. "You there? What's your name?" one of Terrence's subordinates asked the moment they arrived a meter away from the boy. "Me?" 13 asked back in confusion while holding a glass of fruit juice in each hand. "Yes, you." "Yes, me. Are you messing with me?" The chubby boy, who had asked a question earlier, glared at the 5-year-old who was shorter than him. "What's your name?" 13 asked. "Christopher Rotambus," the chubby boy replied. "My name is Zion Leventis," 13 replied. "Michael Leventis is my uncle. You know that scary adult over there? He told me earlier that if someone were to harass me, he would make sure to feed that person to the fish. Big brother, you look very healthy. I'm sure the fishes will love you." The chubby boy couldn't help but glance at the second-in-command of the Leventis family, who was looking at him with a calm expression on his face. This scared the crap out of the chubby boy. Michael Leventis was known to be the perfect gentleman on the surface, but in truth, he was a sadist who liked to torture people. Thinking that 13 was telling the truth, the chubby boy, unnerved, took a step back, his face pale from fright. That's not true, the chubby boy stuttered. Just because I'm a little chubby doesn't mean I'm delicious. I don't taste good. Really? 13 asked back. Yes. In fact, I am very unhealthy. I'm not fit enough to be fed to the fish, the chubby boy answered desperately. He wasn't born into a prestigious family, so he didn't have the right mental training to know when someone was lying or not. The chubby boy was just asked by his family to become one of Terrence's subordinates, hoping that he would be able to hug the leg of a member of the Leventis family. Okay, I will convince my uncle to not feed you to the fishes. 13 nodded. In return, can you bring these glasses of fruit juice to the table over there? That is my aunt's table. As long as you do this, I will make sure you don't get fed to the fish. Right away, young Master Zion, the chubby boy didn't hesitate to grab the 2 glasses of fruit juices before hurrying to put them on the table where the Lockwood family was. The chubby boy even respectfully bowed before placing the glasses on top of the table and bowed a second time before returning to Terrence's side. Lady Callista couldn't help but smile after seeing this scene. Not only did her grandson manage to order someone else's subordinate, but he was also able to use her nephew, Michael, as a shield. Michael had a deadpan look on his face after seeing how the show progressed. Even so, he had to admit that his nephew's way of handling the situation got his approval. Although no one was pointing it out, the fact that someone was able to order someone else's subordinate to do something meant that the 5-year-old was able to dominate that person. It meant that Terrence wasn't capable enough to make his subordinates loyal only to him and not listen to anyone's orders aside from his. The adults of the Leventis family took note of this, and their impression of 13 was raised by a notch. He might have used a dirty trick to overcome the situation, but they knew that not everyone would have that kind of presence of mind when faced with the situation the 5-year-old child was in. Terrence gave the chubby boy a sidelong glance, making the latter shudder. In that brief exchange, he understood that his master wasn't very happy with what he did, making him dread what might happen to him after the party. Suddenly, 13 chuckled, making the chubby boy glare in his direction. Big brother, I like you. 13 replied. Would you like to serve under me? I am also a member of the Leventis family. Work for me, and I'll take you flying. No. I am Master Terrence's subordinate, the chubby boy replied. I am loyal only to him. He is the best master in the world. Terrence, who was disappointed with the chubby boy earlier, felt that he had recovered some face after his subordinate declined 13's offer. Because of this, he decided to decrease the severity of his punishment compared to what he intended to do earlier. 13 clapped his hand as he looked at the chubby boy, whose name was Christopher Rotambus. Christopher, I wish I had a subordinate like you, 13 said. If my cousin ever throws you away, you can come and join me, okay? That's not going to happen, Christopher stated. My loyalty is only for Master Terrence. Huh, understood. 13 sighed bitterly. You're lucky to have someone like him, cousin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to talk to Grandma. She said she wanted to talk to me after I finished eating. Isn't that right, Grandma? 13 looked at this grandma with an affectionate gaze, making the old lady smile sweetly. Come, Zion, Lady Callista said as she gestured for her grandson to come to her. Grandma wants to talk to you. I'm coming, Grandma, Zion replied before giving Terrence a brief nod. He then walked confidently towards his loving grandmother, while Terrence, as well as the other guests in the party, looked at his small back. From start to finish, the one who had complete control of the conversation was none other than the 5-year-old boy. He expertly created a scene that would avoid a direct confrontation with Terrence, allowing him to settle the matter peacefully. The children might have not noticed, but the adults certainly did. That child had handed Christopher an opportunity to redeem himself in Terrence's eyes, making him swear his loyalty to him. Although he obeyed 13's order earlier, making Terrence lose face, his firm and unyielding stance to remain as his subordinate made the 11-year-old genius of the Leventis family forgive him for his earlier mistake, which saved the chubby boy from a pitiful ending. 13 was the system of cannon fodders, so he knew that the two boys who tried to harass him were only forced to do what they did. Because of this, he made sure to give them a way out, with neither of them getting seriously hurt. Although the first boy suffered from his machinations, his injuries could easily be healed by the powerful healers of the Leventis family. In short, he might have suffered physically, but he would not receive any further repercussions because Terence would pity him. Only when 13 had arrived in front of Lady Callista did Terence remember what he was planning to do to the 5-year-old. Due to how the younger boy took the initiative to lead the conversation, he didn't have the time to execute his revenge for his subordinate. This was also noticed by the adults, making them re-evaluate the 5-year-old boy, who was now happily chatting with one of the most powerful ladies of the Leventis household. Hans, who had become 13's collaborator in order to help cure Lady Callista's current condition, couldn't help but be impressed with how things turned out. "It seems that I have still underestimated you, young Master Zion," Hans thought. "Maybe my lady will really have a chance to be cured after all." While Hans was feeling hopeful that 13 really had the ability to cure his grandma, Michael, who served as his father's right-hand man, looked at his nephew with a faint smile on his face. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree," Michael thought. "He is really your son, Gerald. Both of you and your son are wolves in sheep's clothing." Arthur didn't make any comments after everything that happened earlier. However, his earlier annoyance with the boy, who had gate-crashed his birthday celebration, decreased after seeing his wife's smile. It had been a while since he had seen Lady Callista smile from her heart, and it made him remember how he fell in love with her the first time he saw her smile. As long as he could see his wife's happy face, he was willing to tolerate Zion's existence, at least for the time being. The party continued as if nothing happened, but the guests were still disappointed because their entertainment had been denied to them not just once but twice. Since 13 was staying with Lady Callista, there was little to no chance that there would be someone daring enough to antagonize him. Of course, 13 knew that this was a mere stopgap measure. The discontentment among the younger generation of the Leventis family was obvious to those with eyes to see. Understanding that the situation would change very soon, the 5-year-old decided to play it safe and took action. When a waiter, who was holding drinks in his hands, passed near their table, 13 took the chance and tugged at his robe. "Mister, can I have one of those drinks?" 13 asked. "They look good." Young master, this is not a fruit juice," the waiter replied politely. "This is called champagne, and it's an alcoholic drink for adults." "Mister, it's fine," 13 smiled. "I'll just take a small sip." "But..." The waiter felt helpless. He had seen that the boy was close to Lady Callista, so he didn't want to be rude. But he also understood that he might get punished if he really gave a child an alcoholic drink. "Zion, you're still too young to drink champagne," Lady Callista said. "Why don't we ask Hans to get you a fruit juice? What would you like?" "Grandma, I just want to take a sip," 13 replied with puppy eyes. "It looks so good. Can't I?" Lady Callista frowned and was about to tell him that kids shouldn't drink champagne cause they were still young, but someone else beat her to it. "Isn't it fine?" Arthur said as he walked towards his wife. "Kids only learn from their mistakes. It is best that he learns it early, so he will not repeat the same mistake in the future." The patriarch of the Leventis family then looked at the waiter, making the latter nod his head in understanding. "Here you go, young master." The waiter carefully handed a glass of champagne to the 5-year-old boy, who was looking at the drink with great interest. "Just take a few sips, okay? If you feel lightheaded or dizzy, you must stop." "Understood," 13 replied. "Thank you, mister." The waiter nodded and walked away to hand champagne to their guests. 13 happily walked towards his grandma, making the latter shake her head helplessly. "Only a few sips, okay?" Lady Callista said as she patted her grandson's head. "Champagne can make even adults drunk, so you shouldn't drink a lot of it." 13 nodded like an obedient child and took a small sip of the champagne in his hands. "Wow, Grandma, this tastes good." Seeing how happy he was, Lady Callista could only smile bitterly. She had a feeling that 13 would drink the entire glass and would be very sleepy later on. Because of this, she decided to make a gesture to Hans. She asked the butler to call Zion's family and tell his mother that he would be staying overnight. Hans nodded and excused himself before walking to the corner of the hall to talk to Alessia about the development of the party. Arthur snorted internally as he looked at the 5-year-old, who was happily sipping the sparkling drink that was not meant for children. Michael, who was paying attention to the venue, was taking mental notes of the expressions of their guests. Seeing that they seemed to be enjoying the party in their own way, he felt more at ease. Although the 5 monarch clans and 10 prestigious families didn't always get along with each other, they still acted as though they were on friendly terms, especially during events like this. Suddenly, Terence and another 11-year-old from the Lockwood family glanced at each other and smiled. The boy then walked toward his grandpa, Arthur, and bowed his head respectfully. "Grandfather, since everyone has almost finished eating, will it be fine if my friends and I have a sparring match to entertain everyone?" Terence asked. "I'll allow it," Arthur replied. "Michael, take care of the preparations." "Yes, father." Michael nodded before glancing at the few people who were tasked with keeping things in order inside the main hall. One of them made hand symbols. A few seconds later, a faint blue barrier appeared in the main hall, which would serve as the arena for those who wished to spar. The representatives of the prestigious families all nudged their children to participate because this was a common occurrence during these kinds of gatherings. It was a way to tell the other families how good their children were and showcase their potential. Of course, the children also liked these sorts of events because all of them were very competitive. They were raised to excel above ordinary children at a young age, so they were itching to spar with their peers and prove who was the strongest among the members of the young generation. Terence was just one of the seeds of the Leventis family that had great potential. Of course, there was someone stronger than him in the family, but that child would not be allowed to participate in these public sparring battles. They were the trump card, who was being trained to hold a high position in the family. The 5 monarch clans and the other 9 prestigious families had these talents as well. They were grooming them to become pathfinders. Unlike wanderers who only wandered from place to place, pathfinders were people who could lead others, making them the true leaders of the young generation. Basically, those who had leadership qualities, as well as the strength to be recognized by others, were often labeled as pathfinders. One by one, the children sparred against each other, giving life to the party. The hidden rivalries between families would often flare up during these sparring matches, and one could tell that this was their way of telling others that our kids are stronger than yours. Most of the battles ended within the span of a minute, while the longest lasted for nearly 3 minutes. Since these children were still ordinary humans and not yet wanderers, they focused more on their family's techniques, showing how much they had mastered them. 13 watched these battles with half-lidded eyes as he continued to drink the rest of his champagne. "This body is really weak," 13 thought. "I've only had a single glass of champagne, but I already feel sleepy." Suddenly, he saw Terence walking in his direction with a smile, and he instinctively knew that the moment had come. "You already tried twice and you still want to push your luck?" 13 finished the rest of his drink. Although he didn't want to admit it, he was already quite drunk. Only his strong willpower was keeping him from making a fool of himself in front of everyone. "Cousin, why don't we spar a bit?" Terence asked. "Zion is already sleepy and drunk," Lady Callista said firmly. "He is not fit to spar. Look for other children to play with, Terence." Lady Callista already knew that Terence was specifically targeting her grandson. As an adult, she didn't want to get in the way of the matter between children, but she was biased toward her grandson. Hearing the displeasure in Lady Callista's voice, Terence decided that it wasn't worth it to make her upset over this matter. Because of this, he decided to take a step back and apologize for his rudeness. But before he could do that, the 5-year-old boy took a step forward and pointed at his face. "A weakling like you dares to challenge me?" 13 asked. "Junior, you court death." "He's drunk." The people at the party looked at the peppy 5-year-old whose face was flushed. They didn't know if they should laugh or feel sorry for him because, clearly, he wasn't in the right state of mind for calling an 11-year-old boy a junior, when he himself was only 5 years old. "What's wrong?" 13 asked. "Are you scared?" "If you're scared, then go away. I don't fight with weaklings." Lady Callista frowned and motioned for Hans to take Zion to her room so that he could rest. However, Arthur's laughter spread in the surroundings, catching everyone by surprise. This is interesting, a snot-nosed brat daring to call someone older than him junior? Arthur smiled. Terence, make sure to give him a handicap. Seeing that his grandpa had approved of his challenge, Terence nodded his head and looked at the boy, who had made him lose face twice. Don't worry, I will only use one hand, and I won't move from my spot. I will also not attack you. If you can land a hit on me, then it's your win, Terence stated. He only wanted to make 13 make a fool of himself to entertain their guests. This was what Terence was thinking at that time, and since he had given so many assurances, he was certain that even Lady Callista would agree to let the 5-year-old spar with him. Just as Terence expected, Lady Callista reluctantly agreed to it. Since Terence wouldn't be attacking her grandson and promised to only stand in place, she decided to let 13 spar with him. However, she still gave Arthur the, after this, I will have a nice and long talk with you, gaze, making the handsome middle-aged man smile. Hans, be the referee of this spar, Lady Callista ordered. Her voice was firm, and it indicated that she wouldn't allow anyone to oppose her. As you command, my lady. Hans bowed his head and even helped 13 walk toward the arena so that he could spar against Terence. For some reason, although everyone in the room thought that this was going to be a funny spar due to the younger boy's current state, Hans had a feeling that all of this was part of 13's scheme. Ever since he interacted with the boy, he no longer treated him as a child. He still found it weird that he thought this way, but there was something in 13 that made him feel unconditional trust toward him. This feeling was something that he only had for Lady Callista, and now he was feeling the same for a 5-year-old, whom he had only met 2 weeks ago. When the two children were finally facing each other, Hans raised his hand and declared the start of the spar. 13 then laughed as he wobbled drunkenly, heading toward Terence, who was laughing at him due to how funny he was acting. The other guests were either chuckling or smiling, thinking that the 5-year-old's antics were very funny. There were even times that they thought that he was about to collapse to the floor because he was wobbling so badly. When he was only a meter away from Terence, he tried to punch the 11-year-old, but the latter only deflected it with his hand. Since his punch had missed, 13's body spun due to the momentum of Terence's deflection. Everyone thought that the little boy was about to fall over when suddenly, 13's left foot rose up and accidentally kicked Terence's left knee, making the older boy grunt. I won. 13 laughed as he pointed at the older boy, who didn't expect that he would get hit by the 5-year-old's clumsy and unexpected kick. Weakling, huh? That one doesn't count. Terence's face became beet red due to embarrassment after 13 reminded him of the condition of their spar. After all, the older boy had declared that it would be 13's win as long as the latter managed to land a hit on him. You are going back on your word? 13 pouted as he swayed from side to side. That's no good. Then how about this? If you hit me again, it will really be your win, Terence said. No. I don't get any benefit from it, so no thanks. Benefits? Then how about I give you a peak bronze grade weapon if you win? 13 shook his head. You only have a bronze grade weapon? Is your grandpa poor? How come he only gave you a bronze grade weapon? He must be very stingy and poor. A pin-drop silence descended inside the main hall after everyone heard 13's words. Terence's grandpa was none other than Arthur Leventis, the patriarch of the Leventis family. And a 5-year-old child dared to call him stingy and poor? Suddenly, a laugh reverberated across the hall, which sounded like the pealing of a bell. Everyone's gaze landed on the old lady, seated in a wheelchair, who was still laughing as if she had heard the funniest joke in her life. Perhaps, she was the only one who would laugh at someone poking a joke towards the patriarch of the Leventis family without worrying about the consequences of her actions. Seeing her laugh, Arthur smiled and looked at the 5-year-old, who had subtly insulted him in front of everyone in the room. Mid-silver grade, Arthur stated. If you win, I will give you a mid-silver grade weapon of your choice. 13, who was still finding it hard to stand up properly, wobbled after hearing Arthur's statement. Although his face was flushed and looked like he would fall on the floor at any given moment, a glint of mischief briefly flashed in the depths of his eyes. The old man took the bait, 13 thought. Now, I won't have to worry about finding a weapon for Mikhail after he completes his second wandering. Although his family lived a comfortable life, Gerald and Alessia didn't have enough money to buy their children good equipment for their journey in Solterra. This was also why Gerald decided to go on an expedition. It was to gather enough funds to buy Mikhail a good set of weapons and armor after he completed his second wandering. On the third wandering, the children who managed to survive would be allowed to use any equipment that had been obtained by others in Solterra or forged using the items that were taken from Solterra. Of course, there were still restrictions. After completing the second wandering, the children would rise from rookies into adepts. The highest grade of weapons that they could wield at this stage were mid-silver grade weapons. Only children from the monarch clans and prestigious families could gain this kind of advantage over their peers. Of course, there were exceptions, but as long as you were part of this family, even if your talent was mediocre, you would still gain these kinds. This was one of the benefits of simply being born into these families. A/N, each weapon grade has 4 stages, namely, low, mid, high, and peak. Okay. 13 then pointed at Terence. Prepare to lose, you weakling. Terence looked at the annoying brat with contempt as he raised his right hand. This time around, he had every intention to attack the boy the moment 13 entered his strike range. Although he said earlier that he wouldn't attack the 5-year-old, he was annoyed that his grandpa would bestow upon him a mid-silver grade weapon of his choice if he were to lose. Even in their family, they had to show that they were capable enough to receive such a benefit. This gave Terence the strong urge to teach the 5-year-old a lesson for biting off more than he could chew. Just as 13 was nearing Terence, he suddenly took a few swaying steps back and looked at the butler, who served as the referee of their sparring match. Mr. Butler, I forgot the conditions for this sparring match, 13 said. How do I win again? Hans looked at the boy who was looking at him with unsteady eyes before shifting his gaze to Terence. State the condition of this duel again, Hans stated. Since the patriarch has agreed to give a reward to this boy if he wins, it is best if the rules are clarified first. In the eyes of the adults in the party, a mid-silver grade weapon did not hold that much value. However, for the kids who still hadn't started their first wandering, such a weapon was considered a treasure that would help them in their future journeys in Solterra. Terence became flustered because his original plan to attack 13 had to be set aside. If the rules were clarified, yet he still attacked the child, people would think that he was making light of the intelligence of the people around him. Since the patriarch is present, he was now duty-bound to answer Hans' question and state the condition of the duel. He will win if he manages to land an attack on my body or make me move from my spot, Terence replied. I will also not attack him in any way and only use one of my hands to protect myself. After stating the conditions for how 13 would win the duel, the drunk boy finally nodded his head in understanding. He had felt Terence's intent to hit him earlier. Although there was no killing intent, it still allowed the 5-year-old to know that the older boy was going to retaliate against him if he came within striking range. Because of this, he asked Hans to confirm the rules of victory first, to ensure that the boy would be forced to restate the conditions of their spar. Just as expected, Terence's stance had changed. 13 no longer felt that the older boy wanted to attack him, which made him smile internally. However, since his opponent dared to even think of harming him, he also changed his plan accordingly. The little drunk boy then moved toward the table and went to the utensil area. He then picked up a dozen steak knives, making Terence's eyes widen in shock. Oh, what do you think you're doing? Terence shouted as 13 wobbled toward him, holding the bunch of steak knives in his hands. 13 frowned as he stood 3 meters away from Terence. He then dropped the knives on the floor and picked 2 of them. Just stand still, 13 said as he pulled back his arm, preparing to throw the steak knife in his hand. Wait! Terence shouted. Why are you using steak knives? I didn't tell you that you're allowed to use that. That's right, 13 replied. You didn't tell me that this was not allowed, Why are there suddenly 2 of you? No matter, I'll just hit one first and figure the rest later. Without another word, 13 threw the steak knife, which brushed past Terence's left shoulder. Due to the barrier that stood at the edges of their sparring arena, it didn't hit anyone else and fell harmlessly on the floor. I see, so that's a fake one, 13 chuckled before throwing the other steak knife in his hand. Okay, here's the second one. The knife throw was fast, cutting a small tear on the right shoulder of Terrence's tailor-made suit. I missed again, hic, 13 smiled. Before picking up 4 steak knives and looking at Terrence with a devilish smile on his face. This time, hic, I won't miss it, so prepare yourself, hic. Just as he was about to throw the 4 steak knives in his hand, 13 felt an adult's hand rest on his shoulder. Okay, that's enough, Michael said, stepping into the arena in order to stop the boy from actually hurting one of the members of the Leventis family. He had seen how the 5-year-old threw the 2 knives. That was enough for him to understand that he was very proficient in what he was doing. The fact that the second knife tore Terrence's suit without drawing blood proved his accurate control over his throws. But, Uncle, I still haven't managed to make him move away from his spot. It's fine. I'll give you the prize instead of Father, so be a good boy, okay? 13 nodded and handed the knives in his hands to his uncle. He then slowly laid on the ground and closed his eyes. A few seconds later, he fell asleep, making the adults unable to decide what to think of the 5-year-old boy, who was always getting in the way of their entertainment. Hans sighed in his heart before picking up the sleeping boy off the floor and walking in the direction of Lady Callista. The old lady smiled and patted her lap. The butler understood what his mistress wanted, so he obeyed and made 13 sit on her lap sideways. Lady Callista tenderly held her grandson, letting him rest his head on her shoulder. Perhaps, recognizing that he was in his grandma's arms, the boy mumbled innocently in his sleep. I love you, Grandma. Lady Callista looked at the troublemaker before shaking her head helplessly. Let's go back, Tricia, Lady Callista ordered. The maid nodded. Yes, my lady. Tricia then pushed her mistress' wheelchair toward the exit of the main hall. No one barred their path, and Hans swiftly followed behind them. When they could no longer be seen, Gideon looked at his wife, Sandra, and smiled. Your nephew sure is something, Gideon whispered. It seems that he played everyone in this party, including your father. Sandra sighed and didn't bother to reply to her husband's words. She decided that, a few days after the party, she would go visit Alessia and tell her about the events that had transpired at the party. Arthur didn't say anything and acted like nothing had happened. But for the first time since he saw the boy, a feeling other than mild annoyance emerged from his heart. That little rascal, Arthur thought. Just what kind of *T is he teaching his son? Somewhere in Solterra, a man with short black hair and blue eyes sneezed. Alessia must be thinking about me, Gerald thought as he dissected the monster he had just killed. Since 13 had asked him to bring back a lot of Jinn cores, as well as monster parts, he intended to collect as many as he could before returning home to his lovely family, whom he treasured very much. 13 slept well, skipping dinner and waking up at 4 in the morning. The moment he opened his eyes, he found himself lying on a soft and very comfortable bed. He was asleep for nearly 16 hours straight, and he woke up feeling refreshed and invigorated. The boy then propped himself up and sat cross-legged on top of his bed. Now that his head was free from the haze of being drunk, he tried to recall the memories of the party to check whether he had been able to look at it with an objective mind. As a system, 13's memory was impeccable. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he had an eidetic memory, which meant that he could recall things with high precision and accuracy. Everything he did was planned. He could have easily landed a blow on Terrence's body and won their spar, earning him the reward that was promised of him. However, he didn't do that. He had used a more drastic method instead in order to test something, and his method worked wonders. Because of this, he was able to gauge that there was someone in the Leventis family who would come to stop him. 13 knew that Arthur wouldn't bat an eye even if his knives were to pierce Terrence's body. Fortunately, his cousin was saved because his uncle moved in to stop him, giving the 5-year-old a more favorable opinion of his father's family. I guess there are still a few decent people in the Leventis family, 13 muttered as he remembered his prim and proper-looking uncle, who served as his grandfather's right-hand man. Since he was already awake, 13 left his bed and walked toward the balcony. The surroundings were still dark, but the boy didn't think much of it. He started to take slow and deep breaths in order to relax his body. He then initiated the 24 forms of Tai Chi. After doing this every day, the boy already strengthened his body's flexibility. His movements were fluid as he executed each form with a serious expression on his face. When he was done, he repeated the same forms from the beginning. Despite the chilly morning air, his body was starting to warm up, and it made him feel good. Just as he was about to finish his forms, he sensed a presence looking at him from a distance. However, 13 didn't look in that direction. He simply started some breathing techniques, not paying attention to whoever it was that was watching him. A few minutes later, he exhaled a long breath, completing his morning routine. Suddenly, the presence that had been watching him for a while appeared beside him, making the 5-year-old look at his right side. "Good morning, Uncle," 13 said as he gave the older man a respectful bow. "Good morning," Michael replied. "Are you done with your exercise?" 13 nodded. "Good," Michael said. "Now, follow me. I will bring you to the treasury, so you can pick the weapon I promised you." Without waiting for his permission, Michael picked him up like a sack of rice, hoisting him over his shoulder. A moment later, he disappeared from the balcony, heading toward the main residence of the Leventis family. Half a minute after Michael had left, Hans stepped from the shadows and looked in the direction where his young master was taken away. As the protector of the villa where Lady Callista was stationed, he had sensed Michael's appearance. However, since the latter didn't have any malicious intent toward his nephew, Hans decided to not do anything and just observed the situation. Getting the recognition of Michael is a good thing, Hans thought. It seems that your plan to leave a lasting impression on the Leventis family worked, Zion. The butler once again merged with the shadows and continued his role to protect the everlasting villa, where Lady Callista was currently resting. Meanwhile, inside the Leventis family's silver-grade treasury, 13 was busy inspecting the weapons that were on display one by one. He was pleasantly surprised to see that the weapons weren't ordinary weapons. In fact, they could be considered top-tier. This was the treasury where the talented members of the younger generation of the Leventis family chose equipment. All the items inside of it were silver-grade in varying stages. There were even avatars that were firmly kept in special containers, ready to be used by their new owners. Michael only promised him a weapon, but he didn't stop his nephew from checking out every nook and cranny of the treasury. Since there was no possibility for the boy to steal anything right from under his nose, he allowed him to view everything that was on display in front of him. An hour later, 13 stood in the axe section of the treasury and looked at the axes that were on display. As the one who chose and bestowed the God of War axe martial techniques to his brother, Mikhail, 13 was more than qualified to pick the best weapon for his brother. "I wonder if I can empower these weapons further using rune magic," 13 thought as he touched the handles of the axes. They were the weapons that were dropped or rewarded to the Wanderers of Solterra, and all of them contained special abilities that 13 wouldn't be able to use due to the restrictions that were placed on his body. If he could inscribe rune magic into the items gained in Solterra, not only would they become more powerful, but it could also open up another possibility for him. However, in order to be sure, he would first need to consult the Laplace demon and ask whether he was allowed to do what was on his mind. If 13 could imbue a weapon with more abilities, then he could sell them in auction houses, allowing his family to gain a lot of money. Since they were cut off from the Leventis family, their family funds could only be gained through completing quests, as well as going on expeditions in Solterra. While he was thinking of this money-making opportunity, 13's gaze landed on a particular axe with intricate designs, making it look like a precious relic instead of a weapon. But a frown appeared on his face after reading the information listed on its display case. "It's almost perfect," 13 thought. "But there is one big problem." The boy looked at the bottom of the information on the silver-grade weapon, which made him scratch his head. Mountain King's Axe. Rank, mid-silver grade. Active abilities, Echo Slam, Mountain Splitter. Passive abilities, Sharpness, Auto Repair, Aura of Protection. Weight, 900 kilograms. The axe weighed nearly a ton, and it was almost impossible for 13's brother, Mikhail, to wield it. In fact, he believed that only those of the Grandmaster or Champion rank who specialized in strength could use this weapon. This was also why no one from the Leventis family had taken the axe out of the treasury. There was simply no one in that age range who could wield it. After careful consideration, 13 steeled his resolve and looked at his uncle with a determined look on his face. "Uncle, I'm taking this axe," 13 said, making Michael raise an eyebrow because of his choice. "Understood," Michael replied. "I will have it packed and sent to your residence later this afternoon." Michael had to admit that his nephew's choice surprised him. However, he still thought that 13 made the wrong decision in picking the axe that no one had been able to wield ever since it had been acquired by the members of the Leventis family. "Promise to visit me often, okay? At least once or twice a week is good," Lady Callista said as she hugged her grandson. "Understood, Grandma," 13 replied. "I'll also bring Remy next time. I'm sure she'll be happy to meet you." "I'll look forward to it then," Lady Callista said. "Hans, you better stay in touch with Zion, so we can schedule his visits, okay?" "Yes, my lady." Hans bowed his head in acknowledgement. After saying their goodbyes, 13 finally left the Leventis residence. However, as he departed, he couldn't help but sense the gaze of two people coming from somewhere. It might be Michael and that old man, Arthur, 13 thought. It seems that my visit here in this place has paid off. Not only was he able to form a stronger connection with his grandmother, but he was also able to leave an impression on the patriarch of the family, as well as his eldest son. 5 minutes later. "Here you go, young master." Hans handed the vial, in which Lady Callista had placed a drop of her blood into, to 13. He had only managed to give it a brief glance before the party. But now, the boy was finally able to take a closer look at it. "Just as I expected, the poison has already spread to her entire body," 13 thought. "Now I understand why the doctors were only able to suppress the poison and not eradicate it properly. The poison also contains a curse. Fortunately, I can deal with something like this." Hans, who was driving the car, looked at the rearview mirror and observed 13's expression. He was looking for any signs that might tell him that the boy would be able to find a cure for his master. But the minutes passed in silence. Just as Hans was about to ask 13 whether he would be able to cure his grandma, the boy raised his palm, facing up. This put a stop to whatever Hans was going to say. The second thing that 13 did was place a finger over his lips, signaling the butler to not say anything. The boy then pointed at his ear, before pointing at several places in the car. Hand immediately understood what the 5-year-old was telling him. It seemed that the car had been bugged, and their conversation was being monitored by people. Since the butler had been warned, he no longer initiated any form of conversation with 13 and focused his attention on the road. 5 minutes later, they arrived at 13's residence. The boy made a gesture for Hans to follow him inside the house so that they could talk in private. Remy, who seemed to have sensed his arrival, happily ran in his direction. Seeing his sister's brisk tiny steps, 13 smiled. After giving her a hug and patting her head, he held her hand and looked for his mother so that she could look after his sister for a bit. Remy was a smart girl, and 13 didn't want her to be there when he talked to Hans about Lady Callista's condition. There was a chance that she might mention it accidentally, which would jeopardize his future plans. Fortunately, Remy didn't throw a tantrum nor insisted that she come with him. 2 minutes later, he and Hans finally arrived inside his room, where they could finally talk in private. "Okay, let's start with the things that you already know," 13 said as he made a gesture for Hans to sit on the couch. "First, the poison has already spread inside Grandma's body. It will slowly cause her body to deteriorate, and if not treated within the next 10 years, she will probably die." Hans was surprised by 13's deduction because this was also the diagnosis of the strongest healer in the world. She mentioned that, at most, Lady Callista only had 10 more years to live if the poison in her body wasn't removed. The butler was already impressed with the boy's intelligence, but after his explanation he couldn't help but think that the boy was also very knowledgeable in the healing art. Because of this, he felt hope that his mistress would finally recover from her suffering. "I won't bore you with the details, but yes, Grandma can be cured," 13 stated. "You will need to gather several ingredients, and some of them are incredibly rare. Since it will take some time for me to write a list, I'll just give it to you 4 days from now. That is also when I will go back to the Leventis residence, with Remy in tow, to see Grandma. But, Hans, Take note that gathering the ingredients is just the first step. Grandma needs to undergo therapy, and I can't do it inside the Leventis residence. There are too many eyes there, and I don't want to stand out more than I did at the party. The only thing I want to gain is recognition from the Leventis family. I don't want them prying into my secrets. Do you understand? Hans nodded. Does that mean that I need to bring my lady here in order for you to execute the treatment? Yes, 13 replied. But the only people that are allowed to accompany Lady Callista are you and her maid, Trisha. No other member of the Leventis family must come with you. I don't care what excuses you make, but make sure that no one else will accompany the three of you. One more thing, I can't trust Trisha as much as I trust you. She reports directly to that old man Arthur. The only reason why I'm allowing her to come is because it will be less suspicious. You'll need to deal with her so that I can spend some time alone with Grandma. Do I make myself clear? Hans arched an eyebrow after hearing the boy's statement. Indeed, Trisha did report directly to the patriarch of the Leventis family. Hans and Lady Callista didn't mind this one bit since the patriarch only wished for his wife's safety and swift recovery. Trisha wasn't an enemy and seriously cared about her mistress. But the fact remained that her loyalty was with the Leventis family, so she must be excluded from the circle of trustworthy people that 13 was slowly building to become his strength in the future. Understood, Hans replied. How long will the treatment take? 13 pondered a bit as he did some calculations. A minute later he raised 2 fingers. 2 years, 13 replied. I can make her recover faster, but there might be some side effects if I rush it. I need Grandma to be perfectly healthy, so 2 years is just the right amount of time for a full recovery. Besides, if she is cured instantly, people will get suspicious, especially those who have treated her in the past. We don't want them to start poking their nose in places that are off limits to them. Also, I intend to make you work hard for my sake as well. And no, this isn't part of the 3 favors that I will ask of you in the future. These are just menial tasks to ensure that Grandma's recovery will not encounter any mishaps. As long as you cooperate, I will guarantee that not only will she be able to regain her strength, but her life force will become more robust as well. Hans felt as if a stone had finally dropped from his heart. Now that there was truly a chance to cure Lady Callista, he was more motivated to collaborate with 13 to make it happen. It seems that visiting this residence a few weeks ago was truly the right choice, Hans thought. I'm glad I did it. Truth be told, he wasn't supposed to make any contact with Gerald's family since he had already been disowned by his father. However, when he saw how sad his mistress was, he decided to take the initiative to find Gerald and ask him to visit his mother so that she would feel a little better. Although he might get scolded by Arthur for bringing Gerald back to see his mother, he was willing to take that risk as long as it would make her happy. Young master, I will return 4 days from now. Hans bowed respectfully. I pray that the next time we meet, you'll be done listing all the ingredients necessary for curing my lady's condition. The butler was already used to bowing to people because it was his job. But there were only a handful of times when he sincerely wanted to show his respect and acknowledgement to people. Right now, Hans had already deemed the 5-year-old as someone who was worthy of his respect and admiration. Even though he still didn't understand how a 5-year-old could accomplish what he did and know things that even adults were unable to comprehend, it didn't really matter in the end. He could tell that the boy wanted him to become his ally. Hans already promised himself that if 13 was really able to save Lady Callista from her suffering, forget about the 3 favors that he wanted from him. He would gladly serve and do any favors that the boy would ask of him and treat him as his benefactor for life.